بجنة 1028 على مسلمة لبث روموية كاذن أثكناش الوثو سيجية ذلو منيو ذتعوية فصفخ لمعل العرقو ذروموية عرق كلهن ذات وثو ذاسية وذكابذوكية من كدومايهن وف كل عرو ذمن يامو وعل دورو وقامو ولبنان وإذامو لميليتيني وعل أرسيناس نخرو وإذامو لارميني جاويتو. On this day, July 15th, 1309 years ago, the most overpowered army the world had seen until then, the forces of the Caliphate, led by the renowned Muslim general Maslama ibn Malik, began the siege of his true target of invasion, the Queen of Cities, Constantinople. This was a true full-scale siege, the second siege of Constantinople, which lasted 13 months, from 717 until August 15, 718. Unlike the first one, which some claim to be nothing more than a 4-year blockade. With a clear aim of total conquest, Maslama marched forward with his innumerable forces into Roman Anatolia, like the passage above from the Syriac Zuclin chronicle I just read to you described, led by a defective Roman general named Konon. This cunning commander was playing a dangerous double game, with one of the highest stakes ever in history. He planned to use the Arab army to force his emperor, Theodosius III, to abdicate, become the new emperor, then ward off the Saracens with the impregnable defenses of Constantinople. Had it gone wrong at all, history as we know would be completely different. Indeed, this was literally the rivalry of two Syrians, Konon of Germanikia and Maslama of Damascus, but their conflict would become the defining moment that we remember as a clash of civilizations. That the Islamic Arab one tried to wipe out the Christian Roman one, but failed, and which allowed for the development of Latin Europe in the back. And it paved the way for a new Roman imperial dynasty, for Konon attained this objective and was now crowned as Emperor Leon III, the first of the Isaurian Dynasty as it is known in historiography, a dynasty that profoundly reshaped the Roman Empire to adapt it adequately for the Middle Ages. So, in my very humble opinion, the second siege of Constantinople, 717, should be considered as the starting point for the intermediate stage of Eastern Roman history, what we call Middle Byzantium. And this video is a compilation of all my history content on Middle Byzantium from my Eastern Rome Summarized series. So, the episodes from Leon III all the way to the advent of Alexios I Komnenos, or in terms of dates, 717 to 1081. And that's my personal definition of what the Middle Byzantine era is. Let me justify my choice. I know some would include this up to 1204 or maybe even extend it to before the Heraclean dynasty, but from my perspective, the 7th century just has some stronger continuity with late antiquity, rather than with what came after. And the Komnenian dynasty was too crucial for setting up the whole system late Byzantium ran on for us to consider the Latin sack of Constantinople a cutoff point. Like, this is something we could write thesis on, and I don't want to be too wordy in the introduction. So, that's the brief version. It's the classical image of Byzantium, the ultimate medieval empire with a capital city the world was envious of, with a functioning bureaucracy, palace plots and schemes, with eunuchs, splendidly orthodox, rich and influential, oh, and the cataphracts, of course. A curious blend of the ancient and medieval, of Greek, Roman and Christian, of East and West, a bit of everything. Now that my collaboration with my wonderful fellow channel, Ancient Sight, has finished narrating the Isaurian dynasty, I believe it's time to revisit my old videos on them, and the rest of this fascinating period. Go check out Ancient Sites channel, by the way. I think you'll find that his late antique videos are some of the best made online. And now that we are working together to bring you the entirety of Roman history afterwards, and much more, you will find that I am much more detailed in the research for those videos than my old Eastern Rome summarized ones. So, this compilation also serves as a reference for me to compare how much I have learned over the years, as well as a handy tool for those of you who like to marathon my series, which I know quite a few do. I recommend, if you like this video, to follow up on both our channels to rediscover Middle Byzantium and later periods, with much more depth and fresher perspectives. You won't be disappointed. And now, I stop yapping and let you enjoy the show. Leon III the Isaurian had angered Caliph Suleiman, and the latter decided to besiege Constantinople in 717. This was serious. Leon was a usurper, and now he faced the full might of the Umayyad Caliphate. If Suleiman took the city of Constantine, then the rest of the Roman Empire would shatter, and Christian Europe would be open to invasion from the Muslims too. Evidently, the siege was crucial to the survival of New Rome and Christianity, so luckily, our usurper Leon handled this sticky situation spectacularly. Yet despite his success, Leon would introduce a policy that caused devastating internal strife within the empire: iconoclasm. If you're confused, fear not, as today's Eastern Rome Summarized will explain all. Suleiman sent his brother, Maslama, to lead the siege. The Arab army arrived in summer, but Leon had already evacuated the city, gathered men, and called on the Bulgars, whom Theodosius had allied with earlier. Still, Leon offered to pay the Arabs off as a peaceful solution, but Maslamas refused. His fleet arrived in fall, but the Roman navy was already prepared. Apparently, the Arabs learned nothing about fighting Romans on water after their first siege of Constantinople, and Roman ships equipped with deadly Greek fire incinerated the many Arabs and their ships. At night, while they were fleeing, Leon raised the naval chain, blocking entrance to the Golden Horn, making the traumatized Arab fleet almost irrelevant. The land army didn't fare much better, as the Bulgars came and inflicted heavy casualties on them. The Muslim army, now stuck between Romans and Bulgars, since the Theodosians were so impregnable so they could break into Constantinople, and the Bulgars harassed the Arabs from the west, passed the unusually harsh winter of 717 in this terrible position. They weren't used to the cold, and suffered badly from famine and disease, while the Romans chilled out in their capital with no shortage of food. Caliph Suleiman died, lowering Arab morale, but in spring 718 the new caliph sent reinforcements to his army. However, since the sailors who brought the supplies were Egyptian Christians who defected to Leon despite doctrinal differences, the Romans incinerated the Arab blockade with their vital intel, regaining access to the Black Sea, allowing Leon to send forces to Anatolia, who routed Arab reinforcements and killed them all. This news panicked the besieging army, and many tried to flee but were crushed by the Bulgars. Maslamas was ordered to surrender on August 15th, but even then his broken army suffered hits while retreating. Muslim sources claim 150,000 of their men were lost in this volley, 80,000 being the modern estimate, not to mention the ships and sailors cooked by Greek fire. This humiliating defeat for the Umayyad Caliphate severely weakened them, and never again did Arabs try to take Constantinople. This triumph of the Romans brought them 7 centuries of life. Surely, this must mean all as well? Not for Leon. He thought the very fact that the Romans, whom he took to be God's new chosen people like the Israelites, faced such a threat was a sign of God's displeasure, so he tried to fix that. He wouldn't find a solution immediately, but he was quick to create his dynasty when his son Constantinos was born. Many call it the Isaurian Dynasty because it was believed that Leon was Isaurian, but we now know he was Syrian. Still, we'll stick with that term. Leon the Syrian's position as the legitimate Roman emperor was secure and undisputed only once he put down the rebelling former emperor Anastasius II in 719. Leon focused on 2 things: restoration and reformation of the empire. His colleague could back him to the throne. Thus, Strategos of the Armenian Khan, Adavasdos, was made Comis of the Opsikion, returning discipline to the rowdy Thema that was involved in the deposition of at least 2 emperors. Leon replaced the Karavisiani corps with the Kivireoton, strengthened the military and navy considerably to push the disorderly caliphate out of Anatolia and launch raids into their territory. But the tables were soon turned, and Arab raids resumed intensely from 720 onwards. Major cities and fortresses like Talisandos, Gamachon, and Iconium fell from 721 to 725. This deeply troubled Leon and reinforced his idea that the Romans must have angered God. He tried to solve the problem by forcing baptism on Jews in 722, but that didn't work. His next attempt to appease God was through judiciary reforms. During the Heraclean Age, the Romans were so occupied with foreign threats that law studies have declined. Leon modified and updated the Corpus Juris Civilis with new laws to enforce Christian morality, issuing the rectified handbook called the Ekloga in 726 in Greek. Yet nothing seemed to have been improved, because that summer a volcano erupted on the island of Thera, causing deadly tsunamis. We know it was just an unfortunate natural disaster, but Leon didn't. Drastic action was needed to regain God's favor. Leon and his advisors, after much discussion, decided that icons, beautifully painted pieces of wood with religious imagery, possibly evolved from old pagan portraits of the gods, were to blame for Rome's bad fortune. Icons were thought to perform miracles, so they were cherished and venerated by the Romans. But Leon and his iconoclast followers claimed that veneration of images was practically pagan idolatry, and that Muslim success was due to the rejection of such imagery, so icons were to be condemned. Iconoclasm began when Leon replaced an icon of Christ from the palace gates with a cross. The Pope, monks, the populace, and the famous John and Damascene fiercely opposed him. The Helados and the Exarchate of Ravenna revolted in 727, and while the mutiny was quickly put down, it took years for Leon to re-establish control in Italy. However, Venice, the huge player in later Roman history, will never be recovered. But an event that year could make us question Leon's dedication about removing icons. The Arabs, under Abdallah al-Battal, a Muslim hero, besieged but failed to take Nicaea, and was said that the failure was credited to a parade of icons. Why weren't those images destroyed? See, this video was hard to research for this reason. Iconoclasm was a key transition period in Roman history that forever tainted the reputation of Leon and his son, capable emperors during rough times, and our rare sources for this period were all written by iconophiles, so you'll have to bear with chronological gaps, bias, and inaccuracies. In 730, Patriarch Germanos abdicated due to Leon's iconoclast tendencies. The new Pope, Gregory III, opposed iconoclasm, so Leon responded by separating the churches of southern Italy from Rome's jurisdiction in 731, and even sent a fleet to arrest the Pope in 733, but like Justinian II's attempt, it failed. Like our noseless friend, young Constantinos married the Khazar princess renamed Derini for an alliance against the Muslims, but in 737 the Khazars were beaten badly and converted to Islam. However, fortune gradually favored the Romans. After 3 years of constant Arab-Saxon raids, Leon and Constantinos counterattacked. The Basileios destroyed a large Arab army at Akrinon in 740, killing prominent Umayyad commanders, including al-Battal, and halting Arab incursion into Anatolia for 3 decades. It was an impressive victory, as it was the first pitched battle the Romans won against Arabs. The next year, Leon III died from dropsy on June 8th. He did spark one of the biggest controversies in Roman history, but he stabilized the empire during one of its darkest hours and deserves some credit. His reputation as a victor over the Arabs justified iconoclasm for many, especially the Anatolian army and his son Constantinos, who went a tad too far. You see, the new Basileios broke not just icons but also iconophiles, earning the nickname Kapronimos, the dung-named. He played an active part in his father's reign and had legitimacy, but while he was campaigning in 742, Artavasdos usurped the throne with iconophile support while Constantinos led and rallied supporters in Amorium. The two fought in 743 and Leon's son won. Constantinos V regained his position and the usurper was blinded, but Artavasdos' betrayal and pro-icon policy made the young emperor deepen his hatred for icons. Constantinos made an epic comeback like the renowned Metos, but didn't waste his second chance. He was an energetic and skilled leader, especially in his early reign. He reformed the military by breaking up the Erari of Sicyon, forming the Thema Optimaton and Bukilarion within it. He created the Tagmata, elite regiments of professional soldiers loyal to the emperor based in the capital. When the plague returned one last time, Constantinople depopulated from 745 to 747. Constantinos settled inhabitants of Greece to the city, boosting the Roman capital's demography and increasing its Hellenization. Meanwhile, the Umayyads went downhill after 740, and descendants of the prophet's uncle, the Abbasids, revolted. Constantinos exploited this chaos to campaign. In 746, he retook his father's hometown in Germanicea. In 747, the Kivireoton destroyed an Arab fleet and retook Cyprus. At last, the Romans were back on the offensive in the east, but things deteriorated in the west. In 751, the Lombards killed the last exarch of Ravenna, ending the exarchate. Only southern Italy stayed Roman, so the papacy turned to the Franks for help, becoming distant from New Rome. In 752, 752, Constantinos captured Theodosiopolis and Melitene from the new Abbasid Caliphate. In 754, he was confident enough of himself and his iconoclast views to hold a synod of Chaerea. He condemned icons and iconophiles and would stick by these policies for the rest of his reign. Iconoclasm intensified, and serious persecutions took place later. Pope Stephen was too occupied with Frankish King Pepin to attend. Speaking of Pepin, he would subjugate the Lombards and cause Rome to leave East Roman control forever. Constantinos tried to be on good terms with the Franks, so the two exchanged many gifts. Now let's discuss the Bulgars. The Basileios had been resettling Christians from the cities they saved in Thrace to build fortifications and create a no-man's land on the eastern front. That annoyed the Bulgars. Their demand for tribute in 755 was refused, so they raided Thrace, but Constantinos drove them off and launched 9 campaigns against them. He crushed them at Markella in 756, and while he was in Thrace, tamed the Slavs as well in 758, but got crushed himself by the Bulgars at Rishki Pass in 759. But the Bulgar Khan failed to take advantage of the Roman defeat, leading to his overthrow by the new Khan Telets in 762, and the eventual comeback of Constantinos. In 763, Telets raided the empire like mad, so the Basileios pursued him to Anchialos and scored a victory so glorious that he threw a triumph, while the Bulgars overthrew Telets and suffered political instability for years. For most of the 760s, the emperor dealt with domestic matters and iconophile opposition, earning his vile title. He condoned desecration of monasteries and severe punishments on people to suppress icon veneration, and was a dick to monastics. Stories go that his opposers were blinded or executed, and he mocked those who appeared too pious. Some of his victims include Andreas Caliphate, Andreas of Crete, and Saint Stephanos the Younger. After his fleet was wrecked during a Bulgarian campaign in 765, he wasn't happy and entertained the populace by forcing monks and nuns to marry in the hippodrome to ridicule their vows of chastity. But this show didn't stop discontent from rising among high-ranking officials who plotted against Constantinos. When the emperor found out, he purged his administration of traitors and appointed iconoclasts as his officers instead, like Michael Lachanadrakon as strategos of the Trakision in 766. He would also force monks and nuns to marry like his master. Yet despite all this, Constantinos was a great patron of secular art and renovations. The aqueduct of Valens was cut by Avars during the 626 siege of Constantinople, and nobody repaired it until a drought hit the city in 766 and Constantinos undertook this operation. He became so popular for fixing the aqueduct that a legend about him slaying a dragon arose. Constantinos dealt with foreign powers in his final years, exchanging prisoners with Arabs, negotiating with Franks, and campaigning against Bulgars. In 768, Leon the Khazar, his eldest son, married the Athenian Irene Sarandapigena. In 773, he was informed of the new Count Teleric's raid by his spies and crushed the Bulgars near Lithosauria. Sly Telerik tricked him into revealing those spies and killed them in 775. Furious, Constantinos set out on a new campaign but sadly fell ill and soon died. He was an active and energetic emperor who played a crucial part in the empire's military recovery, but also misused that energy on persecuting iconophiles. Leon IV the Khazar, a nicer guy, succeeded him. He was the first proper Porphyrogenitos, child born in the porphyry chamber built by his father. At once, he secured the succession of his son Constantinos when he became emperor, for he had many half-brothers. He gained the support of the Roman people, and in 776 they took an oath to accept his young son as co-emperor. A scheme by his half-brothers was exposed, but they were pardoned. In 777, Count Telerik deserted to the Romans, so that left the Bulgars weak and disorganized. In 778, Leon set out on a massive, when I say massive, I mean massive campaign against the Arabs. All the eastern land demata were assembled into a huge army of 100,000 men and attacked the Abbasid Caliphate. Strategos Lachanadrakon crushed an Arab army near Germanicea, and the army went home with so much loot that Leon threw them a triumph. The Arabs retaliated in 779, invading Anatolia, but Leon's men repelled them with Fabian tactics. Leon was brilliant like his father, but a more moderate iconoclast. Still, when in 780 he found out that some of his officials and his wife Irene were secretly iconophiles, he punished the former and distanced from the latter. Shortly afterwards, Leon died, probably from his tuberculosis. Leon the Khazar was the first emperor since Mauricius to have lost no Roman territory at all, and he was in general a great leader. It's too bad he died so young. Now Constantinos VI and his mother Irene ruled, or technically Irene ruled for the most part, first as her young son's regent, then on her own. Yet on the first year they encountered opposition from nobles who used Leon's half-brother's legitimacy as a front, but they were purged. Irene carefully put only her allies in power, but her governor of Sicily, Elpidius, revolted in the name of those half-brothers and deserted to the Abbasids after his defeat in 782. Then, Arabs invaded Anatolia under Harun al-Rashid, who might have been trapped had an Armenian general not defected. Irene was forced to pay for peace, angering the army. However, in 783, Her favorite eunuch, Stavrakis, victoriously subdued the Slavs in Greece, so he got a triumph, and Irene felt confident enough to push for iconophile policies. In 784, she chose her Asicrates, Tarasius, as Patriarch of Constantinople and spent the next few years consolidating iconophile support while strengthening defenses in Thrace. As the empire, especially the army, was still iconoclast at the time, a council convened by Irene and Tarasius was disrupted by angry troops, and it took a year for the pair to organize a new one, the Seventh Ecumenical Council, Irene's greatest accomplishment. The papacy was still traumatized from the previous visit, so Irene sent the army on campaign and held the council in Nicaea. The Synod of Hierea was overturned and veneration of icons was restored. After 787, things didn't go so well, for Constantinos reached adulthood and began squabbling for power with his mother. Previously, he had been promised to the Frankish princess Gertrude, but Irene broke off the engagement and chose Maria of Amnia as wife for her son. Like any 16-year-old being told what to do, Constantinos was very bitter but accepted it anyway. Gertrude's father, King Carolus, attacked Roman holdings in Italy in 788, which Irene failed to stop, and another loss to the Bulgars in 789 caused her popularity to decrease while Constantinos plotted to exile his mother with his iconoclast supporters, but that plot was discovered by Irene in 790. She jailed her son and demanded an oath of loyalty from the army. The Armenian Khan refused, prompting the others to also revolt, pressuring Irene into releasing Constantinos and confining her to the palace of Eleutherios. Constantinos VI was now the sole Roman emperor, but not for long. His incompetence quickly made him unpopular, being defeated in 791 by the Arabs and in 792 at Markelai by the Bulgars. The loyal Achanadrakon fell in battle and he really needed support, so he made his mother co-ruler again, hoping to gain more iconophile followers. Now the army wasn't happy at all, so they schemed to put one of his uncles, Nikephoros, on the throne. In response, Constantinos mutilated all his uncles, making him look cruel and paranoid. The Armenian Khan revolted but was crushed by the Basileios in 793, while Arabs took advantage of this to raid in the east. The next year, Constantinos divorced Maria and married his mistress, causing the Mykian controversy, for back then, divorce was considered adultery, and his monk supporters were alienated from him. Constantinos was constantly losing support due to very bad judgment. Could he have been influenced by Irene? Maybe. In 795, he won the only military victory of his reign against the raiding Arabs, but it didn't help, as in 797, Harun al-Rashid invaded, and due to false info that the Arabs retreated, Constantinos returned to the capital without fighting, and it made him look terrible. Whether or not this was planned by Irene, her son's prestige was at an all-time low, so she decided to strike and seize power. Constantinos was caught, dragged to the porphyry chamber where he was born, and with his mother watching, blinded there and deposed. We don't know when he died, but from now, Leon the Isaurian's line was ended, and Irene became Vasilisa of the Romans through devious means. She didn't rule much better than her son. In 798, she bought expensive peace from Harun, again making the army displeased. She was unpopular among the Themata and had to spend a good portion of her rule trying to keep everyone happy and deal with the squabbling of her eunuch advisors Stavrakis and Aetius. It was impressive that she even stayed in power for 5 years. However, her downfall would come eventually due to the Franks. Now, with Constantinos deposed, Irene was acting as Emperor of Rome, and Pope Leo III did a little trolling and exploited this loophole. According to the West, since women have no right to rule, then the throne of Roman Emperor was technically vacant, and it is the Pope's duty to appoint a male emperor. And who better than the Frankish king to assume this position? On Christmas Day 800, Carolus Magnus was crowned Imperator Romanorum by the Pope, becoming the first Holy Roman Emperor. What did the Romans think? Consider this from their perspective. The Pope of Rome, the Pontiff, gave the title of Roman Emperor to a barbarian, when he has no right to do so and when there is already a Vasilisaton Romeum, no matter how unpopular she is. That's plain usurpation right there, and the Romans did not regard Carolus as Imperator Romanorum, nor would they accept to be ruled by him. When he proposed to marry Irene, that became a possibility, and coupled with her existing unpopularity, the Romans had enough. In 802, the Logothete Nikephoros deposed Irene and exiled her to Lesbos, where she soon died. Irene and Constantinos were rather incompetent compared to their predecessors, and their military and political failures probably delayed the eventual resurgence of Roman power and culture, but their power squabble rather than the two of them was more to blame. If Irene wasn't so power-hungry and Constantinos rebellious, their shared rule could have worked out much better. Just my 2 cents. And that was the end of the Isaurian Dynasty. I feel like I must address the important issue of East-West divide during this period. Leon's iconoclasm very much worsened the existing differences between East and West. I mean, the eastern provinces were the fervent supporters of iconoclasm, while the western provinces along with the papacy were defenders of icon veneration. Plus, Leon, a Syrian from Umayyad territory, initiated iconoclasm, while Irene, an Athenian from the European side of the empire, ended it. Anyway, this division would cause the Christian hegemony to end and the West to split spiritually from the East as well. The Holy Roman Empire often tried to suppress the Roman identity of the true Romans from 800 onwards, and those in the East in response emphasized that identity much more eagerly in the following centuries. This divide will also cause the Great Schism and the 1204 sect of Constantinople. I just find this very important in the history of Eastern Rome, so I think I needed to emphasize it. Nikephoros, the Logothete, became emperor, and he would prove capable until a disastrous accident ruined everything he worked for and gave rise to the second iconoclasm, but that's for the next time. For now, thank you all for waiting such a long time for Eastern Rome Samurai Season 2. As always, feel free to like, subscribe, and comment if you have questions or corrections to make. See you all soon. The term Dark Age is kinda problematic because as nowadays we know the Middle Ages wasn't just dirty peasants and ignorance. So why do I use it in the video title? Because since the death of Heraclius, the Roman Empire underwent changes so drastic, the prosperous medieval state that evolved from the antique one feels like a different empire altogether. But our topic today, the early and mid-9th century, is the final stage of this transformation. In today's Eastern Rome Summarized, friends, the Dark Ages of the Eastern Roman Empire are at an end and it will emerge stronger and more unified than ever. With Irene deposed, Nikephoros I was Roman emperor. He inherited her problems and ironically her policies, heavy focus on the Balkans and support for iconophiles. First, he had to secure his reign. He crowned his son Stavrakios co-emperor and dealt with Irene's loyalist general Vardanis Turkos in 803. The Themata weren't happy with Nikephoros, who tightened the budget after Irene's tax cuts, so they proclaimed Turkos emperor. Before revolting, Turkos and his proteges, Leon the Armenian, Michael the Amorian, and Thomas the Slav, saw a hermit, who correctly predicted the imperial fates of the four. Turkos' revolt failed, he was exiled and blinded. Leon and Michael were rewarded for deserting the Nikephoros, who started negotiating the Pax Nikephori with Carolus, which future emperors concluded. Aside from abandoning Irene's tax cuts, Nikephoros also saved money any way he can, making himself unpopular and refused to pay tribute to Harun al-Rashid, who invaded the empire. Nikephoros faced the Arab army at Crassus, where he suffered a terrible defeat he barely escaped. But as Harun had to face a revolt in 805, Nikephoros seized the chance to upgrade border defenses and raid Cilicia. Meanwhile, the Strategos of Hellas retook the Peloponnese from the Slavs. Nikephoros would soon start his great revival of the Balkans. In 806, the emperor elevated an Asicrates of his name to the Patriarchate. The student monks protested a bit, but then Nikephoros took up the Meat King controversy again and tried to make emperors above canon law, clashing with the monks. Meanwhile, Harun devastated Anatolia and Cyprus. The Basileios could only end this aggression by paying a humiliating tribute, which freed Nikephoros from major concerns in the east and he could continue his work in the Balkans. The Bulgars expanded rapidly under Count Krum, and aware of the threat, Nikephoros expanded the empire's borders up to Sardica in 807, but the Themata revolted so he had to turn back. Soon, the Basileios began his policy of resettling Romans in the Balkans, which by 809 were no longer a backwater. Before her deposal, Irene created the Thema Macedonias in Thrace. Nikephoros continued the trend, militarizing the Balkans by creating several new themata, the Thema Peloponnesu, Thessalonikis, Kefalonias, and possibly Didyrakiou, and raised a new tagma, the Euganoti. Krum didn't like the growing Roman military presence, so he took Sardica and committed atrocities there. Nikephoros in turn planned a campaign to destroy Bulgaria once and for all, but instead totally destroyed his own forces. In 811, he, Stavrakios, and his son-in-law Michael Rangave set out with the largest Roman army in the Balkans since the Copronymus days and plundered Pliska. What could have been a great victory turned into a disaster comparable with the Battle of Adrianople as Nikephoros fell prey to the old Roman disease of hubris. The army got undisciplined and cocky as hell while Krum gathered his forces. As the slouchy Roman army marched through Varvitsa Pass, they found themselves trapped by Bulgars and their allies. Then, their indecisiveness and carelessness caused a slaughter when the Bulgars attacked. Nikephoros was slain, Stavrakios broke his spine, Michael and just a few men escaped while Rome's best was massacred. That barbarian Krum turned Nikephoros' skull into his cup. It's okay, Boulgaroktonos, your time will come. Such was the legacy of Nikephoros, a capable administrator with grand designs, who saved the Balkans economically but also caused the untimely doom of himself, his dynasty, and countless able men in a totally avoidable disaster. Poor Stavrakios was paralyzed and reigned for only a year, during which all was aware of his limited time, so he tried to organize a smooth succession. He could make his wife Theophano empress, or his brother-in-law Michael emperor, but in the end he had no say. His officials got the Senate in Tagmata to proclaim Michael while he was unconscious, so Stavrakios had to exile himself. He soon died. The reign of Michael Rangave, the first Roman emperor with the surname, was heavily dominated by Patriarch Nikephoros, Abba Theodoros the Studite, and his wife Procopia, who influenced him to be a pious ruler, persecute heretics, and be overgenerous with imperial money. In 812, he recognized Carolus' status as emperor, just not of the Romans, and Venice was back under Roman control. The Bulgars were still a huge threat. When Theodorus got Michael to decline a peace from Krum, Thrace was devastated. Many Romans deserted and more cities were plundered. Michael was very inept at dealing with the barbarians, scoring only a small victory at Adrianople in 813 and felt he could crush Krum. He got the Tagmata, Anatolian troops under Leon the Armenian, and Macedonia's troops under Ioannis Zaplakis to face the Bulgars at Versinikia. Meanwhile, soldiers begged at the tomb of Constantinos V for the deceased warrior to return and save them. Due to inactivity, Michael's incompetence, refusing to help the valorous Zaplakis during his attack, and Leon the Armenian's suspicious withdrawal, the Romans lost. Zaplakis and most of his men were slain. Michael again fled unharmed, but such a severe defeat 2 years after Vapitsa doomed his imperial career. He abdicated and crowned Leon, who castrated his sons. Leon V's reign was almost exactly a replay of Leon III's. After gaining the throne through questionable means, the Armenian dealt with the siege of Constantinople by Krum. He offered to negotiate with, but betrayed the Khan, who angrily devastated Thrace again. Luckily, in 814, Leon crushed the Bulgars near Mesembria and Krum died, so he made a peace with Khan Omertag in 815. He even tried but failed to convert the Bulgars to Christianity. Then, like the Isaurian, the Armenian restored iconoclasm, because he saw the state's misfortunes increase since Irene and he wanted to be a successful military emperor. So he commissioned intellectuals like Ioannis Grammaticos to find support for this policy. A synod was held. Nikephoros and Theodoros protested, so the former was deposed and the latter imprisoned, but no one else was persecuted. Leon was very capable and spent the next few years restoring Thrace and campaigning successfully against Arabs. He created the Dukaton Qaddias, which later became a Thema, and the Thema Paphlagonias, assigning them under the command of his monostrategos Manuel the Armenian in 819. Then, in 820, his buddy Michael the Amorian, the Domesticos ton Excubiton, was suspected of treason. Leon imprisoned and tried to murder his friend in a gruesome way, but his wife Theodosia persuaded him to stay the execution until after Christmas. This gave time for Michael's allies to dress up as clergy and stab Leon to death while he was singing Christmas carols. Then Michael was freed and crowned emperor. Leon the Armenian was a very good emperor, as even iconophiles admit, but he fell prey to the Game of Thrones that elevated himself to his position. Michael II then had to face Thomas the Slav, an old limp but the greatest rebel in East Roman history. He raised a massive base of support after Leon's murder by posing as Constantinos VI, a champion of the disenfranchised and the Caliphate's puppet. Michael's only advantage was control of the capital. In 821, Thomas invaded the empire successfully until he crossed to Thrace to besiege Constantinople. His navy was repelled first by strong wind, then by great fire when Michael counterattacked in 822, resulting in a stalemate, which was only broken when Khan Omertag battered the Slavs' army in 823. Michael was desperate, so he decided to fight a pitched battle, but this demoralized men defected to Michael, and the Slavs' last followers held out in Thrace until they were starved to submission. The Basileios was lenient on most rebels, but not on Thomas, who wasted 3 years of his reign and was in turn brutally murdered. After the death of his wife, Michael married Constantinos VI's daughter, Euphrosyne, who was a nun. This controversial marriage made Theodoros denounce the Basileios, who had freed him from prison earlier because while Michael continued iconoclasm, he encouraged reconciliation with iconophiles and kept the practice purely for imperial continuity's sake. He was on fair terms with the Bulgars and Arabs, yet with Abbasid Central Power's decline, Muslim renegades became a problem. Andalusian exiles to Crete in 824, and due to naval weakness after the Civil War, attempts to retake the island failed, though Admiral Nikitas Orifas did evict Arabs from the Aegean Islands. A similar fate befell Sicily. In 826, the Sicilians revolted and called on Arabs for help, who instead started conquering Sicily in 827. Michael died in 829. He was an able ruler but accomplished nothing astonishing, and his life resembled that of Eusebius I, a rough leader of the executors who became emperor and established a dynasty. His son Theophilos, Ioannis Grammaticos' pupil, played the part of Justinian as an educated and competent successor. Theophilos was interesting to say the least. He grew up with stories of Harun al-Rashid, and he imitated his idol's love for justice and accessibility to his people. He punished all of Leon V's killers, and numerous anecdotes tell of how he personally helped his subjects. This gave him a great reputation even among iconophiles, despite his severe iconoclast policies due to influence from his tutor Ioannis. However, he had an iconophile wife, and a stepmother Euphrosyne's bride show for him. After rejecting Cassiani, the future hymnographer, Theophilos chose Theodora, niece of Manuel the Armenian, who had fled to the Abbasids earlier due to a conspiracy. Theophilos knew Manuel's worth, so when he sent Ioannis on a diplomatic mission to awe the court of Baghdad in 830, he made sure his tutor got his general back, and acquired plans for the Abbasid palace which he used to renovate his own. Despite Theophilos' love for Arab culture, his reign saw intense warfare with them. Caliph Mamun assaulted Anatolia and took a few Roman fortresses, and in 831, Cilician Arabs raided, but Theophilos crushed them with Manuel and had a triumph, while Mamun continued heavily pressuring Rome until he died in 833. More luckily, in 834, the Kuramites, Persian rebels who troubled the Abbasids for years, joined the Romans. Theophilos created the Persian Touma from them and made a trusted Hellenized Persian, Theophobos, their commander. With this revigorated army, he and his Caesar Alexios I struck the Bulgars, reconquering a bit of Thrace in 836 and saving some Romans deported to Bulgarian Kromste, including a certain Basileios. Then he turned his army eastwards in 837, captured cities in Mesopotamia, destroyed Zapetra, Caliph Al-Mutasim's birthplace, and went home for another triumph. In 838, Al-Mutasim struck back. Theophilos tried to stop him but was defeated and almost killed at Dazimon. Then Arabs took Ankara, and with the traitors' help, Amorion too, the cradle of the Amorian dynasty. They sacked the city to the ground and massacred everyone. The only 42 survivors became martyrs. This shocked the empire and Theophilos, undermined iconoclasm, and drove him to fortify the eastern border, where he created some Klaisurite, soon to become Themata, Coloneas, Charsiano, Cappadocias, and Seleucias. He sent Alexios to retake Sicily but called him back in 839 due to intrigue. The Kuramites who fled from Dazimon proclaimed Theophobos as emperor, who was surprisingly loyal and helped Theophilos quell the revolt peacefully. The Vasilevs then created the Klimata Chirsonos to protect his Khazar allies against the Rus. For the next few years, his health faltered while he tried to get the Franks to help him against the Arabs to no avail. Border conflicts continued until Al-Mutasim finally planned a major offensive in 842, but his fleet sunk and he died. Theophilos' health finally failed and he died the same month. To secure succession for his son Michael, he ordered the popular Theophobos to be killed. It was said that he tried to see Cassiani one last time before he died and repented from iconoclasm on his deathbed. He was the last iconoclast emperor, and with him ended iconoclasm. Theophilos was a great emperor, with even greater potential. Despite his failures, his reign was highly beneficial for the empire. Now the Romans are truly in recovery. In 843, Empress Theodora, young Michael's regent, restored icon veneration after her husband's death. After replacing the iconoclast clergy with loyal iconophiles, on March 11th, Empress Theodora, Emperor Michael, and Patriarch Methodius made a triumphal procession and restored orthodoxy to the empire. This event was the triumph of orthodoxy and ended major theological disputes between Romans for centuries. Then Theodora sent her Logothites to Dromo, Theoktistos, to retake Crete. The eunuch was successful at first and created Themacritis and maybe the Thema Aegiopelagus, but returned to the capital due to false rumors. Abandoning the campaign ruined the expedition, since in 844 the emir of Melitene, Umar al-Aqta, attacked Anatolia and Theoktistos was heavily defeated at Mavropotamos. He blamed it on Theodora's brother Vardas, who was exiled. As both sides couldn't continue the fight, they had a truce and exchanged prisoners in 845. For the next few years, Theodora kept the empire relatively safe and prosperous while persecuting a sect of heretics in eastern Anatolia known as the Paulicians. In 846, the raiding Bulgars were repulsed. In 847, Methodius died and was replaced by Michael Rangave's son Ignatius, who represented the empire's zealous monastics. Despite failure to retake Sicily in 848 and raids from the emir of Tarsus starting from 851, the Roman military was recovering swiftly. In 853, they sacked Damietta in Egypt and devastated the emirate of Tarsus in 855. The Bulgars got aggressive again, but Theodora told them off. That year, the teenage Michael took a mistress, Evdokia Ingerina, but was forced to marry Evdokia Decapolitica by his mother. Fearing he'd end up like Constantinos VI, Michael got his uncle Vardas out of exile and with the help of another uncle Petronas, murdered Theoktistos. Theodora was so pissed that she accepted being deposed in 856. Michael III was then sole ruler, but he was aware of his incompetence in governing, so left that to Vardas, who was made Caesar. Vardas was luckily as capable as his sister, and with him the Roman Empire flourished even more. He and Petronius saw a string of Roman victories in the east and made their nephew take part in some of them. By that time, the bitter Paulicians allied with the Emir of Melitene and had their own principality. In 856, Petronius raided the emirate all the way to Amida, and in 857, Michael sent another expedition against Melitene. Vardas drastically improved urban life and secular learning. He reformed the Pandidacterion and supported scholars like Photius, who replaced the thorn in Vardas' side Ignatius as patriarch in 858. In 859, Michael led a siege of Samosata but had to return to Constantinople because the Rus surprise attacked in 860. He and Photius basically prayed the Rus off with holy relics. The next year, a council in Constantinople confirmed Photius' status as patriarch, but in 863, Pope Nicholas I reversed the decision to impose papal supremacy, starting the Photian Schism, which was worsened when Photius sent two brilliant brothers to Christianize the Slavs. Saints Cyril and Methodius created a written language for the Slavs, Old Church Slavonic, which they translated liturgical books into to promote their religion, to the horror of Latin missionaries who wanted linguistic unity. Meanwhile, in the east, Petronius won the Battle of Lalakaon, slaying Alacta, the Paulician leader Cabeas, and countless other Arabs and Paulicians. The Romans then invaded Armenia and killed the Emir of Tarsus. Michael greeted his uncle with a glorious triumph, and in 864 they invaded Bulgaria, showing Count Boris the might of Rome. Boris decided then to convert his realm to Christianity, so the apostles of the Slavs introduced Slavonic to them as well. Rome wasn't pleased but became delighted when Boris wanted independence for his church in 865 and asked for their help. Rome tried to introduce the Bulgars to their brand of Christianity and the Filioque heresy, to the horror of Constantinople. The schism intensified and became a cold war for influence in Bulgaria between the two powers, which got so bad that Michael threatened to bring his army to Rome, but poor Vardas wouldn't live to see its end. For several years now, the aforementioned Basileios the Macedonian had been at Michael's court, rising from his Strator to his chamberlain, and earning his affection to the point where Basileios married Evdokia and Gerina. He was aware that Vardas was troubled by his growing influence, so he convinced Michael that his uncle was plotting, and while Vardas was preparing to go to Crete in 866, Basileios murdered the Caesar who laid the foundation for the Macedonian Renaissance. Michael made his maid Caesar instead, and the two ruled together, overseeing a synod in 867 which excommunicated the Pope, ending the schism. But soon the partnership fell apart and Basileios killed his friend with some conspirators, and that was the end of Michael and the Amorian dynasty. Michael had the odious nickname the Drunkard, for he was a pleasure seeker, but his reign saw much success due to the competency of his mother and uncles. Under Basileios, the empire would soon reach its apogee. At the start of this video, the Romans were in a mess, but now at the end, they achieved ecclesiastical unity, relative prosperity, and military success. The next time we see the Macedonian Renaissance start to take place, and oh boy, I am excited! See you all soon, and thanks a bunch for watching. The apogee of the Eastern Roman Empire is often associated with one dynasty, the Macedonian one. All the splendors of Romania shown with the Macedonian Renaissance and the great Roman reconquests all took place in this period. However, the early years of the Macedonian dynasty were not as smooth as you might think, which is what we'll talk about today in Eastern Rome Summarized. The dynasty's founder, Basileios I the Macedonian, became Basileios through scheming and bloodshed. He immediately took his friend Emperor Michael III's position once the latter was assassinated. Luckily, despite the army's discontent at this usurpation, no one revolted, thanks to Basileios' cunning. He also soon fired Patriarch Photius and reinstated Ignatius to work together with the new Pope, Hadrian II, and tried allying with the Franks in 868 as the Arabs were a pain in Italy. This uneducated peasant was a natural political animal, exactly what the empire needed. However, the Frankish alliance failed. Emperor Louis II asked the Roman ships to take Bari, so Basileios sent him Admiral Nikitas Ourifas, who recently drove off Arabs in Dalmatia and set up the Thema Dalmatias. When he arrived in 869, he mocked the Franks and buttered Louis, causing a quarrel and the fleet to go home. Yet Basileios would soon have success in Italy, while that of Louis in Bari was short-lived anyway. In 870, Arabs conquered Malta, but Constantinople beat Rome for influence in Bulgaria, and Ignatius sent Boris autonomous bishops. Basileios had luckily found himself at the head of an empire with a drastically improved military situation, and he took advantage of it. In the east, the Paulician problem continued. Though Carpeas was killed by Petronius, the heretics gained a new dangerous leader, Chrysocheres, who raided Anatolia in 871 and even defeated the emperor who had to be saved by an Armenian soldier, Theophylactus Lecapenus. This menace was ended by Basileios' son-in-law, Christophoros, who in 872 shadowed the Paulicians to Vathyriak's pass and annihilated them. Chrysocheres' head was sent to the delighted Basileios, who seized many cities in the Euphrates the following years, then celebrated a triumph. The naval front was also busy. The emir of Crete got a Roman trader, Photius, to raid the empire. He was fearsome, but no match for Nikitas Oryphus, who incinerated much of his fleet at Cardia and destroyed the rest at the Battle of the Gulf of Corinth in 873, during which Photius was killed and his fellow renegades tortured to death, though more will appear soon. Oryphus also retook Otranto that year, Cyprus in 875, and Bari in 876. Evidently, the imperial fleet was extremely successful under Basileios, but not invincible. In 877, the Basileivs used his ships to transport marble to build a church, causing Arabs to besiege Syracuse and take it in 878. Sicily was almost completely lost, but in the east, the Romans raised the Friki and permanently defeated the Paulicians. Then Basileios took his eldest son, Constantinos, to campaign in the east, retook the strategic fortress of Lulon, and celebrated another triumph. Sadly, the next year, Constantinos died, and Basileios was never the same again after the loss of his favorite child. He never liked his other sons, Leon, Stephanos, and Alexandros, especially not Leon, who some suspect of being Michael III's son. He would be known as Leon the Wise because he was educated by Photius, who got back into Basileios' graces by forging an elaborate genealogy for the monarch and was appointed head of the University of Constantinople and tutor for the princess. After Ignatius died in 877, Photius was again made patriarch. It might seem that Basileios' later reign was less successful, but Oryphus' successor Admonasor was just as competent, scoring several crushing naval victories in the west in 880, opening the way for the reconquest of southern Italy by none other than Nicephorus Phocas the Elder, founder of the Phocas family. Unfortunately, Cyprus was reduced back to its condominium status in 882, the emir of Tarsus defeated the Romans in 883, and Basileios' relationship with Leon worsened. The teenage bookworm had a mistress, Zoe Zautsina, but was forced by his father to marry a pious woman. Déjà vu? Basileios even beat his son and placed them under house arrest. Leon probably resented his father and plotted his death, which occurred as a hunting accident in 886. Basileios was dragged by a deer for 16 miles, dying from hemorrhage. For 19 years, this murderous upstart ruled with much success, starting the most iconic East Roman dynasty. His repeated success in the East weakened the Arabs so much that Armenia regained independence. Like Justinian, he reignited Roman interest in Italy, built a lot, and reformed Roman law. Under him, the Procharon and the Pedagogy were compiled, basing off the Corpus Juris Civilis and the Eclogy, serving as important foundations for Leon's future magnum opus, the Basilica. As Basileios, one of Leon VI's first actions was to rebury Michael III with ceremony, and ungratefully fired Photius to make his 19-year-old brother Stephanos the Patriarch of Constantinople, since the latter was easier to control. In 888, the Arabs took the city of Epsili, yet as we will see, Leon's military fortune was very mixed. Phocas was recalled, but his success in Italy caused the Romans to capture Benevento in 891 and establish the Thema Longobardias. Meanwhile, Zoe's father, Stylianos Zaoutzis, gradually rose to be one of the most powerful men of the empire. He helped the learned emperor in completing the Basilica, an update of Justinian's laws that also served as the first law code of modern Greece published in 892. Stylianos eventually gained the title of Basileopater, the highest dignity he could receive, as Leon's wife, Theovano, gave up their hopeless marriage and retired to a monastery in 893, leaving the Basileivs free to pursue his true love, Zoe. Despite his legal achievement, Stylianos provoked the worst enemy of the empire for the next 30 years to a disastrous war. The Bulgars gained a new Khan that year, Simeon, the son of Boris. Educated in Constantinople, young Simeon learned Roman conduct and jealously aspired to prove his superiority over Rome. His opportunity came when Bulgarian merchants complained about Stylianos giving monopoly of Bulgarian trade to his friends in 894. The Khan's appeal to Leon fell on deaf ears, so he gladly started a war. As most Romans were fighting in the east, Leon allied with the Magyars, who cooperated with Nicephorus Phocas to deal a heavy defeat on Simeon in 895. The crafty Khan then bought time to ally with the Pechenegs, who crushed the Magyars so soundly the latter migrated to the Pannonian Plain in 896. Simeon then invaded Thrace, and without Phocas around, Leon made peace with the Arabs to transfer his entire army to Europe, but the incompetent command Leon Katikalon ended up losing so bad at Bulgarophigon almost the entire Roman army perished. The barbarians plundered at will until they reached Constantinople, demanding yearly tribute from the Romans and territorial concessions, which Leon was in no position to deny. Simeon gleefully backed off to deal with Serbia, while Leon probably created the Demos Ramonos around this time due to the Bulgar threat. One could imagine Leon's displeasure at this disaster, but his personal life improved. In 897, Leophano passed away, so Leon married Zoe in 898. They were a happy, perfect match, but tragedy struck. Zoe died in 899 due to the devastation of Leon, with Stylianos following shortly afterwards. The Zaoutis family worried about falling out of favor, so they plotted against Leon, but this was revealed to the Basileios by the Arab eunuch Simonas. Leon punished the family and took Simonas as his new chief advisor in 900. Meanwhile, he was plagued by the fact that neither of his two wives bore him a son, which he needed to continue his dynasty. Third marriages were a sin according to the Eastern Church, but Leon needed an heir, so with a lot of convincing, Patriarch Antonius gave the emperor a dispensation, who held a bride show and married the beautiful Evdokia Vianney. The clergy frowned down upon this union, but Vianney gave Leon just the son he needed in 901. Yet, tragedy struck again. She died at childbirth, and the boy followed suit. Leon was again devastated, but still he persisted in his quest for an heir, so he took a new mistress, Zoe Carbonopsina, who he planned to marry only after she gave birth to a healthy son. Back to state affairs, in 902, Taormina fell to the Arabs, marking the end of Roman Sicily. However, their strength and position in Italy and victories in the east make up for it. Leon's men intensely pressured Armenia and Cilicia and managed to sack Theodosiopolis. In 903, the Armenian prince Melias entered Roman service and settled in the fortress of Lycantos, which would later become the Thema de Cantu. The Arab navy became a threat again as Roman traders Leon of Tripoli and Damianos of Tarsus led their raids. In 904, Leon of Tripoli tried to attack Constantinople, so the Basileios made Zoe's uncle Himerios the admiral of the fleet, but the traitor retreated and sacked Thessaloniki, the second city of the empire, taking many prisoners and shocking the Roman world. In retaliation, General Andronicus Dux, founder of the Ducas family, raided Tarsus in Syria with Eustathius Argyros, founder of the Argyros family, and exchanged the prisoners he took for the captured Romans. Such a great general seemed destined for a bright future, but fate was cruel. When Simonas tried to defect to the Arabs, Constantinos Dux, the valorous son of Andronicus, brought the eunuch to justice. Leon led his advisor off the hook who vowed revenge on the Ducai. Meanwhile, Zoe gave birth to a son in 905 called Constantinos, and Leon was set on legitimizing them both. This task was difficult. His friend, the patriarch Nikolaos Mystikos, only agreed to baptize Constantinos if Leon would cast Zoe aside. But then, in 906, Leon ignored the deal and married Zoe anyway, making her the empress. This fourth marriage horrified the clergy. Nikolaos was furious. He threatened to excommunicate Leon and refused to recognize Constantinos' legitimacy. Leon needed to get rid of the patriarch somehow, since his heir's future was too important. An opportunity soon came, because Simonas had been exacting his revenge. He manipulated Andronicus into not showing up with reinforcements for Himerios when the admiral sacked Tripoli. When Andronicus realized that Himerios crushed Leon of Tripoli's Arabs at sea, then on land sacked Tarsus, he knew he screwed up, so he decided to revolt with his family. Leon knew Dux and Nikolaos were tight, so in 907 he deposed the patriarch on pretext of supporting Andronicus' revolt and made the spiritual father Euphemius patriarch, who agreed to crown Constantinos in 908 only if Leon did penance for his sins but refused to acknowledge Zoe as empress. After all this struggle, Leon finally got his legitimate heir, Constantinos Porphyrogenitos. Meanwhile, Andronicus' revolt failed and the Ducai were saved by Arabs. His supporters, like Argyros and Melias, were temporarily disgraced but returned to favor soon as they were too valuable to lose, and technically so was Andronicus, so Leon decided to pardon him. However, devious Simonas showed the secret message to the Caliph, who imprisoned Andronicus in Baghdad. Constantinos Dux, however, fled back to the empire in 908, where he was warmly welcomed but also warned to not have imperial ambitions by Leon. Then, Dux returned to fight on the frontier, where he was successful and incredibly popular, while Karma found Simonas, who fell victim to his own schemes. The Thema Sebasteos was set up around this time as well. At sea, Himerios sacked Laodicea with no casualties in 910 and took Cyprus. Unfortunately, his fortunes were reversed as in 911, Damianos of Tarsus forced Cyprus back to its original status and Himerios failed to retake Crete. Returning from this fruitless campaign, the Roman fleet was ambushed by the Tripolite and the Tarsiad in 912, suffering a heavy defeat. Back home, Leon died from illness. His reign was a very mixed bag. He saw a lot of military disasters, but also quite a few splendid victories, and the start of what we call Byzantine encyclopedism. Many important works were written during this period, like the Tactica, the Book of the Eparch, and the Clerologion of Philotheos, which attests to the creation of the Themanikopoleos, Samu, and Mesopotamias during Leon's time. As Constantinos was too young to rule, Leon's useless brother Alexandros was the next emperor. who reigned briefly and got rid of Leon's closest advisors like Patriarch Ephthemius and Himerius, replacing them with Nikolaos Mystikos and Romanos, son of Theophylactus Lecapenus. In 913, he refused to pay tribute to Simeon, provoking a war before dying from his excessive lifestyle while playing polo. Constantinus Porphyrogenitus, a child, was left to deal with the deadliest enemy Rome has faced in a while. His regent, Patriarch Nikolaos, needed an experienced general to take over things in face of the Bulgar threat, so he invaded Constantinos' dukes to become emperor. But dukes and his supporters found themselves clashing with the Porphyrogenitus' loyal subjects when they came to Constantinople. Dukes died in a street fight while his supporters were punished, like Constantinos Helaticus, who was paraded through the city on a donkey. The empire was deprived of a capable commander, so Nikolaos needed to make peace with Simeon somehow, who was at the city's door, and supposedly got what he wanted his entire life: recognition by the Patriarch as emperor or tsar, like when the Pope crowned Charlemagne imperator a century earlier. Nikolaos gained temporary peace but also promised to marry Constantinos to Simeon's daughter, which was unacceptable to the people of Constantinople and Zoe, who managed to replace Nikolaos' regent in 914. She revoked Simeon's recognition and the marriage deal, hoping to answer the Bulgars with war. After her troops defeated Arabs in Armenia and Italy in 915 and retook Adrianople, the Romans prepared a grand expedition against Simeon that failed spectacularly. Zoe's supporter, Leon Phocas the Elder, son of Nikephoros, took command, and she allied with the Pechenegs, who were to be ferried by Admiral Romanos. Zoe's plan was solid. The Romans would engage the Bulgars near Anchialus while Pechenegs would attack from the north, and was at first successful, but everything went terribly wrong. Lecapenus failed to transport the Pechenegs due to some petty argument, and when Leon's horse ran off, the Romans thought their general died and panicked. The Bulgars seized the chaos to almost annihilate the Roman army. Only a few survived, including Phocas, who rallied the defense of the capital but was again defeated, and Simeon freely penetrated deep into Roman territory. He was once again trying to conquer Constantinople, but Zoe incited the Serbs to revolt, forcing him to go west. This defeat utterly discredited her and Phocas, causing civil unrest while Simeon unleashed hell in the Balkans and made his empire the region's major power. However, that was the apex of Bulgarian power. In 919, after a coup, Romanos Lecapenus took over the capital, but vulnerable Constantinos was not harmed, just compelled to marry Romanos' daughter Eleni Lecapini. Zoe was deposed, Phocas was blinded, Romanos became Basileios Pater and eventually Roman Emperor himself in 920. This Armenian peasant would contain the Bulgar threat and become one of New Rome's greatest emperors. Simeon's ego suffered a huge blow as this marriage smashed his hope of becoming Basileios Pater, but all he could do was devastate the Balkans even more, defeat the Romans at Pegae in 921, but he couldn't take Constantinople as he lacked the navy. So in 922, he asked the Fatimid Caliphate for naval assistance, but Romanos got the Caliph to stay out of the conflict. So Bulgars continued pillaging Thrace until Simeon and Romanos negotiated outside Constantinople in 924, where Romanos supposedly lectured Simeon about Christian morality and offered to pay tribute to Bulgaria. Whether or not Simeon was recognized as emperor is unclear, but he never invaded the Roman Empire again. However, the next year, Simeon started styling himself as Emperor of the Bulgarians and Romans until his death in 927. Now, Bulgaria was weakened by a recent defeat to the Croats and ruled by Simeon's son Peter, who finally settled peace with the Romans. Romanos recognized Peter as emperor just of the Bulgars and let him marry his granddaughter Maria Lecapini, while Peter yielded Simeon's conquests back to the Romans. Peace was finally secured, and after enduring the extremely harsh winter of 927, Romanos, who had shown himself to be a prudent and competent man, a gentle usurper who never ended the Macedonian dynasty but will bring it to new heights, would soon turn his full attention to the east. For some time now, his fellow Armenian general, Ioannis Kourkouas, had been making gains there. So the next time we will talk about the campaigns of Kourkouas and many other badasses. I hope you enjoyed the video, leave your questions and comments below, and thank you for watching. Endurance and flexibility helped the Roman Empire survive the Arab conquests. Now, discipline and daring shall aid the Romans in the reconquests of their territories under Arabs. Hi, welcome to Eastern Rome Summarized, and today we are covering the really good stuff. Now, we last left Romanos in 927, but we must go back to 923 first, because we neglected the Eastern Front those years last time. What happened in 923? Emperor Romanos appointed Ioannis Kourkouas his domesticus tonskolon. Now, Kourkouas was an Armenian like his emperor, but of a prominent family, part of the rising dynasty class who were becoming ever more influential and buying more land from peasants. Though Romanos tried fighting this new social phenomenon, he and Kourkouas were tighter than Justinian and Belisarius. By 924, the Bulgarian War started turning in the Romans' favor. The Arabs' best naval commanders Leon of Tripoli and Damianos of Tarsus were killed, opening up possibilities for conquest. After suppressing a revolt of the Chaldeas, Kourkouas turned towards the east. Let's examine the situation there. In the 3 centuries after the Arab conquests, the Caliphate had declined considerably. Their frontier was defended by border emirates, namely those of Tarsus, Melitene, and Calicala, already weakened by the recent successes of the Romans, who grew tougher and more determined with each victory, at Lalakaon, Lulon, Tefriki, and in Armenia. In 925, Romanos demanded tribute from Muslim frontier towns, whose refusal brought the Roman army to their doors. In 926, Ioannis Kourkouas, his brother Theophilos, and Strategos Melias marched to subdue Melitene, which was made a Roman vassal. After the peace with Bulgaria, Romanos could spare more attention in the east, as unwarlike Tsar Peter knew his place. While a weakened Bulgaria was no threat, it gave rise to heresies and no longer buffered Rome from steppe nomads, though Romanos expertly used diplomacy to keep them at bay. Sadly, more resources for Ioannis didn't ensure more victories. The Romans conducted many raids to Armenia the next few years, but most of their successes were quickly undone. It's worth mentioning that Ioannis temporarily took the capital of Armenia, Divin, with Greek fire, probably the first mention of it used with projectors on land. Nor were things back home very smooth. In 928, a guy posing as Constantinos Dux incited a popular revolt in Yapsikion. His name was Basileios Boulgaroktonos, as the authorities arrested him and cut off his hand, but he made a copper one and revolted again. That ended early in the 930s, but it hardened Romanos' resolve to stop peasant discontent by limiting the dynasty's power. Meanwhile, in 930, though Melias was badly defeated while attacking Samosata, the Kourkouas brothers isolated the capital of Calicala, Theodosiopolis, and captured it in 931, making it a Roman vassal like Melitene. Also that year, Romanos' eldest and most competent son, Caesar Christophoros, died and left his debauched brothers Stephanos and Constantinos closer to the throne, who would be Romanos' downfall. But their brother Theophylactus, made the patriarch in 933, supported their father throughout his reign. In the east, Ioannis again came to Melitene, who renounced Roman allegiance, to conquer the city for good, and he did so. Chaos in the Caliphate left the city without allies, so by 934, Melitene was reconquered and reincorporated into the Roman Empire. Its citizens converted to Christianity, and Romanos turned it into an imperial estate to ensure the dynasty won't take it. Speaking of which, the Vasileivs issued an edict to stop these estate owners from buying more peasant land. In case it's still not clear, Romanos didn't like the dynasty. Meanwhile, the Peloponnesian Slavs revolted, but Romanos quickly quelled them down. The conquest of Melitene shocked the Muslim world, as they lost an entire emirate. In response, a rising Muslim power became Rome's new main enemy, the Hamdanids of Syria, led by the formidable Saif al-Dawla. In 935, he attacked the Banu Habib tribe, who defected to Rome. The next year, Saif tried to save Samosata from being razed by Ioannis, but he failed as he had to deal with the revolt. Soon Ioannis would meet his worthy foe. In 938, Saif invaded and heavily defeated the Domesticus, causing Rome to seek peace with the Caliphate, though war continued. In 939, Romans reconquered Samosata, but Saif drove them from Theodosiopolis, and in 940 raided as far as Colonia before Ioannis came with a relief force. And that's where their evenly matched conflict ended, since until 945, Saif had to establish his emirate of Aleppo, while Ioannis also had to face a new enemy, the Rus, who out of nowhere attacked Constantinople in 941. The city was undefended, the fleet and army were absent, so Prince Igor thought he could easily take the city. Romanos' trusted eunuch advisor, Theophanes, saved the day with his quick thinking. He turned 15 old ships he found in the city into fire ships. The Greek fire incinerated and horrified the Rus, who fled to plunder Bithynia, but they failed even that, as Vardas Phocas the Elder and then Ioannis arrived to crush them. As the raiders scurried off, again Greek fire fell upon them, courtesy of Theophanes. Now with the Rus gone, Ioannis embarked on his final great campaign. In 942, he raided Aleppo, and in 2 years, he captured Martyropolis, Amida, Dara, and Nisibis, the great Mesopotamian cities that feature so much in our earliest episodes. But his real goal was Edessa. He ravaged the city's surroundings until its emir agreed to give him the holy Mandilion in exchange for peace. The Mandilion was a cloth with an image of the face of Jesus printed on it, basically the first icon, so possessing such a relic would greatly boost Roman prestige. In 944, Theophanes retrieved the Mandilion, which was given a triumphal procession in Constantinople, while Ioannis wrapped up his campaign. Romanos must have been very pleased with this triumph, as was his last. The aged emperor became concerned for his soul and felt guilty for his usurpation, so he spent time with monks like Marianos Argyros and made Constantinos Porphyrogenitos proceed as sons for his succession. The spoiled brats weren't happy, so they arrested their father and exiled him to a monastery. They also got rid of the popular Ioannis, making Pantherius Skleros Domesticos, who soon got beaten by Saif near Aleppo. Stephanos and Constantinos weren't popular. The people loved the Porphyrogenitos, and so did their own sister Eleni Lekapini. So in 945, Constantinos VII finally claimed his birthright as sole emperor. The Lekapini boys joined their father in exile, and the Ioannis regained favor, but soon the great general disappeared from history. The last we hear of him was when he helped negotiate a prisoner exchange with Arabs in 946. And thus ends the story of the Domesticus whose conquests reversed the power dynamic in the east in 2 decades. The empire had borders on the Euphrates again, acquired considerable influence in Armenia and created many vassals. Perhaps Ioannis Kourkouas' gains weren't as impressive as future Roman reconquerors, but he was the first of them, and his greatest legacy, the aggressive spirit he infused in the Roman army, shall live on. Having undergone severe trauma as a child and lived under the shadow and yoke of the Lekapini until now, Constantinos, like Emperor Julianus, sought refuge in books and became a prominent scholar. He lived smack in the middle of the Macedonian Renaissance, and he was not only an art patron or collector, but also painted and wrote valuable works during his lifetime, of which the encyclopedic ones are the Geoponica, De Administranda Imperio, De Ceremoniis, and De Thematicus, and historical ones like the Vita Basili and the Excerpta Historica, a list that makes his father's scholarly activity pale in comparison. Some are for his son, Romanos, whom he made co-emperor and hoped would not suffer his own fate of being pushed aside from the throne. Despite naming his son after his father-in-law, Constantinos kinda resented Lekapinos. He called the gentle usurper illiterate and was unwilling to use Lekapinos' men. As seen when he recalled Kourkouas, he didn't restore the position of the new Belisarius, but made Vardas Phokas the Domesticus. Constantinos wanted his own team. He made Marianos top general to reward the monks switching to his side against the Lekapini, yet ironically, he continued much of Romanos' policies, like continuing the fight with the Dinati and the reconquest in the east. In 947, he ordered the Dinati to restore all peasant land they bought without getting compensation. Speaking of Romanos, the poor ex-emperor was enjoying life as a monk, but his loyal Theophylact and Theophanes wanted him back, so they formed a plot but was uncovered by Constantinos, who exiled the latter. The downfall of Theophanes made the bastard of Romanos, Basileios Lekapinos, the new chief imperial advisor, and Romanos passed away peacefully in 948. The scholar emperor mostly chose his commanders wisely, yet when he tried to reconquer Crete in 949, it failed miserably like his father's attempt due to the eunuch general Constantinos Congelis' incompetency. However, in the east, Theophilos Kourkouas managed to fully reconquer Theodosiopolis, ending the emirate of Calicala. Like his brother, he soon disappeared from history as well, so now in the east, the Kourkouas family fought in the north, the Armenian regions, a mantle soon taken up by Theophilos' grandson, Ioannis Themiskis, while Vardas Phokas and his family took care of the south, with his 3 sons being strategy of 3 themata, Nikephoros of the Anatolikon, Leon of the Cappadocias, and Constantinos of the Seleucias, and they mostly had to face Saif. Though Vardas was sadly not competent enough to deal with this talented enemy, his sons proved more up to the task. Leon notably ambushed Saif and killed 8,000 Arabs who just defeated his father in 850. Yet Saif was still quite successful. In 853 he ravaged Melitene and fell upon Vardas, injuring the old general and defeating his army. Then captured Constantinos Phokas and imprisoned him in Aleppo, where the poor youth soon died in captivity in 954. The enraged Vardas tried again to attack Saif but got defeated, so the Vasilevs made the broken man retire, replacing him in 955 with his eldest son, Nikephoros. What a great decision, because Nikephoros Phokas was a military genius like Ioannis Kourkouas, and from then that tide turned in the Romans' favor. In 956, Marianos went to Italy to suppress a revolt and crush Arab raiders, while things went south for Saif. His cousin was captured by Leon, and his vassal, the Emirate of Tarsus, was devastated by the naval attack of Basileios Examilikis, strategos of the Kibireoton, who obliterated the navy with Greek fire. Both strategy got a triumph. The next year, Nikephoros conquered Adata, and in 958, his nephew Themiskis raided Mesopotamia, crushed Saif's army, and conquered Samosata with Basileios Lekapinos. Then both received a triumph. Tarsus was more vulnerable than ever, and soon it'll be reconquered. Meanwhile, Constantinos had been smoothly sailing the ship of state with his expertise in diplomacy. In 957, Princess Olga of Kiev was baptized in Constantinople, beginning the Christianization of the Rus. However, the Porphyrianito soon died in 959. Some suspected his son Romanos' wife, Theophano, of poisoning him, but that's unlikely. The beloved mascot of the Macedonian dynasty, Constantinos, was a capable and intelligent emperor with a mostly successful reign, despite its brevity. Handsome young Romanos II was now Basileios, yet despite having an extremely favorable upbringing, he indulged in pleasures. He left state affairs to Lekapinos, but replaced them as head eunuch with Joseph Bringas, and militarily dependent on Nikephoros, who he temporarily removed from the eastern front to reconquer Crete. Romanos also split the command of Domesticus, making Nikephoros in charge of the east and Leon of the west, though in his brother's absence Leon also scored many victories in the east, ambushing the hell out of Saif during the Battle of Andrasos in 960. Then Leon returned to protect the Balkans by crushing a Magyar raiding party with Marianos. Later that year, Nikephoros set for Crete with a huge army. Besieging the heavily fortified Cretan capital Handex and shortage of supplies during winter brought out the worst of the Roman soldiers. They slaughtered many Cretans in the countryside, and they weren't kind to the people of Handex when Nikephoros finally breached the fortress in 961. The reconquest of Crete was not pretty, but successful, ending Arab control of the Aegean. The heroic Domesticus succeeded where so many failed, earning a glorious reputation and a well-deserved triumph. The tireless Nikephoros immediately set out to reconquer Cilicia. In 962, he took Anazarvos, annihilated the Tarsiad army, and ravaged its countryside. Then went to Syria, where he and Themistocles sacked Saif's capital of Aleppo. While Saif cried over his shattered prestige, Phocas gained more, returning to the capital for a triumph in 963. At the same time, Romanos died mysteriously, rumored to be poisoned by his wife, and soon civil war started over Romanos' succession. The young emperor had an heir, his son with Theophano, Basileios, who was a child and required the regency of his mother and Bringas. Theophano looked to Phocas for support, but Bringas was afraid of the popular general, who was proclaimed by the army as emperor and marched on the capital. Bringas hastily assembled men to defend the Macedonian dynasty and his own power, one of them being Marianus, who tried to capture the Phocats but failed. Leon had fled to join his brother, and Vardas was protected by the people, who killed Argyros and rioted with Lekapinos. Bringas fled, and the rebel entered the city to be crowned as Emperor Nikephoros II. The Vasileios married Theophano and claimed to rule for her young sons, but he wasn't a good politician and his reign was short. For now, he was wildly popular. His family and the Kapinos were richly rewarded with titles. Phocas was a warrior through and through, but also a pious man who helped his friend Athanasius found the monastery of Great Lavra on Mount Athos, where developed the most important Orthodox monastic community in the world. This piety was enforced by Nikephoros on his army, along with strict discipline and many reforms, making the Roman army fully professional and the East's dominant military power for a century. One reform was the introduction of the elite heavy cavalry, the Cataphracti. With these fearsome troops, Nikephoros achieved his military glory. Meanwhile, Tarsus recovered a bit, but it was all in vain as Themistocles, the new Domesticus, took Adana and destroyed the Cilician army. In 964, he ravaged the country and the Vasileios himself arrived to join him. In 965, Phocas sent Nikitas Kalkoutsis to reconquer Cyprus first, before he took the Emirate of Tarsus itself with his best men, his brother and nephew. First, Nikephoros and Themistocles took Mopsuestia, then he and Leon forced Tarsus to surrender. Cilicia was reconquered, and later that year, Germanicea as well, so he celebrated another triumph, but removed Themistocles from command for unknown reasons, causing his nephew to hold a grudge. Now, Nikephoros looked towards Syria. In 966, Saif took Antioch from the anti-Hamdanite Rashid al-Nasimi. This worried Phocas. He tried to take Antioch, but failed, so he raided Syria. Not long after he left, Saif, Rome's greatest enemy since the time of Corcuas, died in 967. Meanwhile, Nikephoros spent more time at home and declined in popularity. To fund his campaigns, he collected high taxes and his soldiers behaved badly in the city. To prove that his men had discipline, he staged a mock fight in the Hippodrome for show, but the people panicked, causing a trampling accident in which many died and the emperor's reputation to plummet. Worse, war broke out in the Balkans, as Bulgaria acted up again and Nikephoros tried to solve this by paying the Rus to attack them. But Prince Sviatoslav, who overran Bulgaria, was an even bigger menace. Despite all this, the Vasileios was able to diplomatically annex Taron and other Armenian lands, again boosting imperial territory. In 968, Otto the German emperor, another pretender to the Roman throne, tried to take actual Roman Italy, but he failed, so the barbarian king sought a marriage alliance with New Rome. Nikephoros gave the ambassador Liutprand of Cremona a humiliating reception, which meant no to the proposal. Then the Vasileios went on his final campaign, in Syria. His eunuch general Petros defeated an Arab army, and Nikephoros subdued city after city, reaching into Lebanon. He built a fortress facing Antioch and left General Michael Vorsis there to wait until he returns from the capital. Petros was also left in Syria to deal damage. Nikephoros went to deal with the Rus in 969 and ordered Vorsis not to attack Antioch yet, but the rash young man disobeyed the emperor and stormed the city with Petros, reconquering one of the 3 cities the Pentarchy lost so long ago. Phocas was thrilled to hear this, but fired Vorsis for his insubordination. The disciplinarian earned the resentment of yet another. His time was almost up. His last act was to make the themata of Italy into one Catipanikion and sent General Eugenius as the Catipano to keep Otto out, before all the allies he alienated, Themistocles, Vorsis and others, conspired against him. Themistocles murdered his uncle, the old war hero, and became the next emperor. Nikephoros Phocas deserved better. His sobriquet, the Pale Death of the Saracens, attests to his military prowess, which made the Roman Empire a major power in the East. His military knowledge was also profound. He wrote the famous military manual, the Praecepta Militaria, and maybe also the De Velitatione Bellica, but that work was most likely written by his brother. Phocas served Rome well as a general, but utterly failed as a politician and brought his own tragic downfall. Emperor Umayyad I Themistocles, from both the Corcuas and Phocas family, was unsurprisingly one of the most talented military emperors of Rome, and unlike his uncle, he was a shrewder statesman. His ability to wash his hands of Nikephoros' murder was proof of that, whose widow, Theophano, he blamed for the act. The empress was removed from the palace and her sons by Lekapinos, Themistocles' supporter. Leon, ever loyal to his brother, tried to revolt in 970 but failed and was exiled. Now Themistocles could do what he did best, battle the empire's enemies. He settled peace with Otto by giving the German an imperial bride so he could focus on the real threat, the Rus in Bulgaria. Vardas Glaros, Themistocles' brother-in-law, and Petros, the conqueror of Antioch, epically defeated Sviatoslav's men while the Vasileivs consolidated power, but now the emperor was free to campaign personally, so Skleros was sent to handle Leon's son, Vardas Phocas the Younger, a rebel. The former Vardas put him down, exiling him to Chios. In 971, Themistocles' fleet blockaded the Danube and he marched to Preslav with his new elite tagma, the Athanati. He crushed the Rus force and took the city. The Vasileivs claimed he would save Bulgaria from the Rus, earning much Bulgar support. Then the Romans besieged the fortress of Dorostolon, where the Rus holed up in until they were starved out to fight, but they were crushed. Sviatoslav finally negotiated with Themistocles, and he was allowed to depart safely. The emperor got a glorious triumph back home and made Tsar Boris II abdicate. For the Romans, Bulgaria was now annexed, but not for all the Bulgars. In 972, Sviatoslav was killed by Pechenegs on the road, while Themistocles, who had extended Roman territory to the Danube, went for the east, where Petros also reduced the Emirate of Aleppo to a client state. Earlier, the Fatimids took over Egypt from the Abbasids and now had interest in Syria, but they were crushed by General Nikolaos near Alexandretta, so the emperor faced no serious threats. He ravaged northern Mesopotamia and got the emir of Mosul to pay him tribute, leaving his domesticus Melias to keep control here until he could return. In Themistocles' absence, Melias rashly besieged Amida in 973 and was defeated by Mosul's emir. He was captured and died in 974. But now in 975, Themistocles returned for campaign. He took Emesa, Heliopolis, then extorted payment from Damascus. He reached Palestine and Jerusalem was within reach, but he turned north to subdue Sidon, besiege Beirut, storm Byblos, and take Laodicea. Though he failed to take Tripoli and most of these conquests were ephemeral, this was impressive. No Roman army advanced this far south for centuries. While returning to Constantinople, Themistocles fell gravely ill and just died like that in 976. That was a shame, as he was a great emperor who balanced daring military exploits with good policies. Had he lived longer, Bulgaria could have been better integrated into the empire, and Syria, no, the entire Holy Land, might have been reconquered. Perhaps his sudden death was karma for assassinating Nikephoros, but no matter what, he was one of Rome's finest emperors. Both Phocas and Themistocles are seen by some as proto-crusaders like Heraclius, but that's just crusader propaganda. These emperors didn't do holy war, they only served their empire. So ends our narrative today, because soon young Basileios, son of Romanos, would take the center stage. This Basileios would continue the legacy of Corcuas, Phocas, and Themistocles, and bring the Eastern Roman Empire to its greatest height in territory and prestige since the days of Heraclius. Are you excited? I sure am. For now, thank you all for watching. This video was fun to work on. Check out the artists for the soundtracks, and I'll see you all soon. More than a year ago, I started this series to share the amazing story of Eastern Rome with you, and only now are we getting to the most famous and iconic medieval Roman ruler, Basileios II, whose reign most consider as the apogee of the empire. And that's what we'll explore today, the reign of the Bulgar Slayer, his struggle with usurpers and wars with barbarians in Eastern Rome summarized. Basileios II, great-great-grandson of his namesake, Basileios the Macedonian, inherited the latter's talents for ruling. He had a brother, Constantinos, and a sister, Anna. As Romanos II's son, he had legitimacy, but since his youth he was dominated by powerful figures. His mother Theophano, his great-uncle Basileios Komnenos, and the usurping soldier emperors Phocas and Themistokles. Themistokles' death in 976 finally gave the now 18-year-old Basileios the chance to rule, but it also gave him a new set of concerns, enemies within and outside the empire. Basileios was strong-willed and active, unlike his Himbo brother, but was also young and inexperienced, so he relied heavily on Komnenos, who adored him and taught him the art of ruling. He also recalled his mother to court. Now, Rome's enemies took advantage of the death of the daring Themistokles. Fatimids drove the Romans out of their Sicilian foothold and Bulgarians revolted. The sons of Bulgarian Commons Nicola led this revolt and helped the deposed Tsars escape. They became known as the Komitopuli, and they made Boris II's brother Roman the Tsar, though they were the true power of Bulgaria. The most capable among them, Samuel, became Basileios' worst enemy in the future. But now let's look at internal matters. Themistokles' friend, the cunning, charismatic Domestikos Vardaskleros, declared himself Basileios, and Komnenos tried to stop him by making Petros Domestikos instead, but it didn't work. Skleros took Byzantium and with his allies, like the weak emir of Mosul, stirred a rebellion. Petrus and Michael Votis' loyalist army was defeated and Votis defected to Skleros. While retreating, Petrus got imperial reinforcements under the eunuch Leon in 977. Leon won a victory over Votis, but Petrus was killed at the Battle of Regiae and Skleros became the master of Asia. He still had to take the capital to usurp successfully, but the imperial navy prevented that, buying precious time for Basileios. In 978, Komnenos freed Vardas Phocas to fight against Skleros, his old foe. Though Phocas lost the Battle of Pankaleia, his friend David III of Tau, a Georgian prince, gave him refuge. After Theophano appealed to David's ex-general Tornik, Phocas got 12,000 Georgian cavalry under Tornik and at the Battle of Charcianon in 979 decisively beat Skleros, who fled east. Phocas became the new Domestikos, David got some Roman territory, and Tornik found the Avira monastery on Mount Athos. It would seem by 980 everything was fine, but no. Skleros was defeated, but Basileios thought him on the loose was still a threat, and the empire was still not run by him, but by Komnenos and Phocas. The former was a great politician but power-hungry and corrupt, while the latter was a great warrior but too aggressive. Basileios was too strong-willed to be bossed around for long, and that would lead to more challenges to his rule. He had only one confidant, Nikephoros Ouranos, who helped him negotiate the return of Skleros with the Buyids, a new Muslim power and now rulers of Baghdad, where the rebel fled. Ouranos and Basileios agreed to a deal favorable to the Buyids while Komnenos was ill in 982, who got furious when he found out. He plotted to get Ouranos imprisoned in Baghdad when retrieving Skleros, so the deal broke off and now there was a rift between the two Basilei. At the same time, Otto II, despite having a Roman bride, invaded Roman Italy but got crushed by the Arabs, so Komnenos made Kalokieros Delphinas the Karapana of Italy, who cleaned up Otto's mess. Meanwhile, in the east, the Fatimids helped themselves to Themistokles' conquests. In 983, they took Damascus and Aleppo was besieged. Phocas saved the city, but he extracted too much payment from it, then he pursued the Fatimids to Emesa and burned the city. Aleppo was a Roman vassal, but they weren't exactly happy with Phocas' heavy-handedness, so in 985 they stopped paying tribute, and that led to a brief conflict which distracted the Romans from the Fatimids, who took Valanias. The emperor made Leon Melicinos the dukes of Antioch and forced him to retake the fort, while he finally broke free of Komnenos' yoke. The heartbroken old eunuch soon died. Basileios wanted to get rid of Komnenos' men as well. He demoted Phocas, Delphinas, and Melicinos, and to prove his own valor, he planned a military campaign against the Bulgarians. That didn't go well. In 986, he led an assault on Serdica, but failed. Then he suffered a massive defeat that shaped the rest of his life. At the mountain pass of Trajan's Gate, Samuel ambushed the Romans and sent the Basileios fleeing for his life. Bulgarians retook eastern Bulgaria, while Basileios' prestige plummeted. The generals he disgraced were ready to riot, and Skleros was also back in the empire. The situation seemed grim, but the disaster of Trajan's Gate and the ensuing chaos turned this headstrong youth into one of the greatest Roman emperors of all time. In 987, Skleros again aimed at the throne and took Melitene. Phocas did the same, with support from Delphinus, Melicinos, David, and other powerful figures. The two Vodda even tried to unite against Basileios, but Phocas betrayed and imprisoned Skleros, then took Abydos. Basileios may have had to deal with one less rebel, but the situation was desperate, and he needed a lot of help to save his throne. He got that from Prince Vladimir of Kiev. Now, this Rus ruler agreed to send 6,000 Rus warriors to fight for the emperor if he could marry Anna the Purple-born. No royal Roman princess has ever married a barbarian, yet Basileios was willing to make a grand exception on an extra condition: if Vladimir would convert to Christianity. Anna wasn't thrilled about her new husband, though this was an event of huge importance in Roman and Russian history. Rome got the loyal Varangian Guard, and Russia got Orthodox Christianity. In 988, these famous Varangians arrived, and Basileios' fortune started to turn. Though his general Gregorios Taronitis was defeated by Phocas at Trebizond, he crushed some rebels under Delphinus and hanged their leader. The next year, the Basileios would put an end to all the chaos. With his Varangians and brother Constantinos, Basileios faced the rebel at Abydos. Just before charging to battle, Phocas dropped dead, probably from a stroke. His army surrendered and released Skleros. Basileios tried to make peace with Skleros, who accepted and even gave him some ruling advice. Phocas' supporter David was punished by the Vasilevs, who forced the Georgian to bequeath him the kingdom of Cal. This year was a turning point in Basileios' reign, as from 989 onwards, the Vasilevs was a full autocrat, trusting no one but himself to carefully govern the empire he devoted his entire life to. Samuel continued his expansion into Roman territory, while in 990 the Fatimids resumed aggression. Basileios was facing a war on two fronts, and unlike almost every emperor from the 7th century onwards, he didn't focus on the east but west, on Bulgaria. He campaigned there almost every year to weaken Samuel and left the east to his generals unless he was truly needed. In 991, Romans again helped defend Aleppo against the Fatimids, while Basileios started his epic conquest of Bulgaria. He retook Veroia, then in 992 meant Gregorios the Dukes of Thessaloniki to guard Greece, while he penetrated deeper into Bulgar lands for the next few years, defeated Samuel at Axios River, sacked Ohrid, took Skopje, and captured Tsar Roman, so Bulgaria was left tsarless. However, Basileios had to leave the west temporarily for the east. What happened there? By 992, the Fatimid vizier of Damascus was Manjutakin, and he was set on taking Aleppo, but Basileios was set on protecting his vassal. Manju took Apamea and besieged Aleppo, but the Dukes of Antioch, Vurtsis failed to stop him, and Manju raided Roman Syria before going home. Then he did that all over again. In 993, the Fatimids took Apamea by sea, and the next year they besieged Aleppo. Vurtsis and Melicinos confronted Manju near Apamea at the Battle of the Orontes, but they lost heavily and the Fatimids critically endangered Roman Syria. So Basileios was forced to leave Bulgaria to personally save Aleppo, and we see one of the most impressive military feats in Roman history. In 995, he took the whole Roman army from Europe to Syria in under a month by giving each soldier a mule to ride on and another to carry equipment. Seriously, the medieval army traversed the whole of Anatolia on mule in just 16 days. Dope! Their sudden appearance shocked the Fatimids, who fled back to Damascus. Basileios stayed in Syria to show the region who's boss. He retook Apamea, Emesa, and many cities, but like Themistokis, he failed to take Tripoli. Aleppo was treated well by Basileios, but Vurtsis wasn't. He was put under house arrest and replaced by Damianos Dalasinos for his failure. After fixing this mess, the emperor returned to Bulgaria. At the same time, Samuel attacked Thessaloniki, killed Dukes Gregorios, and captured his son Asotios. Then, in 996, captured the new Dukes, Ioannis Handus, as well, so the Bulgarians shamelessly raided Greece. Nikephoros Uranos was made the Domesticus of the West and shadowed them to the Sperchios River. Uranos annihilated Samuel's men, and Samuel himself barely escaped. He even considered suing for peace after this massive Roman victory. Meanwhile, in the east, Damianos took many Arab forts, living up to Basileios' expectations. The Fatimids wanted to respond to Basileios' Syrian campaign the previous year, so they built a splendid fleet, but a storm wrecked most of their ships, and Damianos captured those that weren't. By 997, Rome was in a good position on both fronts, but in the west, Tsar Roman's death emboldened Samuel to become Tsar himself. Yet the situation ameliorated in the east, as Manjutakin rebelled against the Fatimid regime and the Vasilevs refused to intervene much. So when the civil war was over in 998, Basileios was on good terms with the Fatimid Caliph. Sadly, Jaish, the new governor of Damascus, wanted Syria for the Fatimids like Manju, and Syria was again in war. At the Battle of Apamea in 998, Damianos broke through Jaish's lines and almost won, but he was killed in action, causing the Romans to panic and be defeated. The Fatimids got as far as Antioch following their victory, and Basileios was forced to go east personally again, with Ouranos following him there as the new Dukes of Antioch in 999. Basileios first buried the fallen Romans at Apamea, then he sacked Temesa, burned Arca, but failed again to take Tripoli. At the turn of the millennia, in the year 1000, the Fatimids finally agreed to a peace with the Romans. Now that Basileios was done with the Arabs, he could focus on the Bulgarians. Before that, he had one more matter in the east. David of Tau died, and the Vasilevs was ready to claim his realm as inheritance. Georgian nobles like Gorgon and his son Bagrat received Roman court titles, and Basileios returned to Bulgaria, where generals Nikiforos Xiphias and Theodorakos launched a lightning campaign up to the Danube Delta, capturing Pliska, Preslav, and securing eastern Bulgaria that Tzimiskis conquered by 1001. That year, Gorgon acted up and attacked Tau, presumably due to jealousy, and Ouranos had to face him, but the next year the whole matter had been resolved by diplomacy. Also in 1002, Basileios captured Vidin. Samuel's realm grew smaller every day, and in 1003 he tried but failed to take Adrianople. In 1004, the Romans defeated Samuel at Skopje and took the city. In 1005, the Romans regained Dyrrhachion thanks to Asotios Taranitis. He had been imprisoned by Samuel, but the Tsar's daughter Miroslava fell in love with him, and Samuel had no choice but allow their union and make his son-in-law the governor of Dyrrhachion. Asotios and the Romans of the city contacted the empire and surrendered Dyrrhachion to Roman rule. Then he and Miroslava fled to Constantinople. We know little of Basileios' actions the next decade, in Bulgaria or otherwise. We know that it was mostly quiet in the east, and Ouranos was able to compose an extensive military manual, the Tactica. Gorgon died in 1008, and Bagrat III became king of a unified Georgian kingdom as David III's other heir. Basileios continued campaigning in Bulgaria every year, defeated a Bulgarian force at the Battle of Creta in 1009, and Samuel regained a bit of territory before 1014, like Veroia and Skopje. A Lombard revolt happened in Italy. Besides some Arab raids that the Venetians helped Rome take care of, Italy had been quiet until Lombard aristocrats like Medals of Bari stirred things up. He took Bari, and Roman Italy was in chaos until its new Catapano Vasileios Argyros retook the city in 1011. Medals fled to Germany, but he wasn't done. In 1014, one of the most famous battles in Roman history happened, the Battle of Clydion. Samuel tried to prevent further Roman advances by holding Clydion Pass with his huge army, and he was successful initially. Basileios didn't lose heart. He ordered Xiphias to outmaneuver the enemy, to attack them from behind. This strategy worked, and on July 29th, Xiphias led an assault that trapped Samuel's army while Basileios broke through the front line. Thousands of Bulgarians perished, and even more were taken prisoner. Samuel barely escaped thanks to his son Gavril Radomir, but he wouldn't live much longer. See, now the famous legend of the Bulgar Slayer kicks in. Allegedly, Basileios ordered all 15,000 prisoners to be blinded, leaving every 1 in 100 men with just one eye to guide the Bulgarians home. When Samuel saw them, he died from the shock. This was a major blow to Bulgaria, yet sadly Basileios couldn't follow up this victory with a complete conquest, as when he advanced towards Strumica, Gavril ambushed the Romans and killed the Dukes of Thessaloniki, so they failed to take the city. However, the Vasilevs took Melnik, Prilep, and Stip before returning home in 1015. By now, Bulgaria was in full decline. Gavril became Tsar, but he soon surrendered to the empire before being murdered by his cousin Ivan Vladislav, so war continued. Tsar Ivan pretended to surrender and was pursued by Basileios, who took Ohrid, the Bulgar capital, and blinded his prisoners again, but the Romans got ambushed by a Bulgarian general and they had to leave Ohrid for now. In 1016, Basileios tried but failed to take Pernik, yet in the Crimea, Romans allied with the Rus against the Khazar successor state and restored much Roman control in the Black Sea. Meanwhile, Aleppo's emir was expelled, and the Fatimids took the emirate in 1017, so the emperor forbade all trade with the Caliphate until Aleppo submitted to Rome again. He continued his Bulgarian campaigns, burned the fort of Longos, and raided what's left of Bulgaria, which was on the brink of defeat. Ivan desperately tried to ambush the Romans, but Basileios crushed his forces. He fled but was soon killed at the Battle of Dyrrhachion in 1018. The First Bulgarian Empire finally ended and came under Roman control. Basileios' lifelong dream was achieved, and he did his best to integrate his new subjects into Roman society. Many Bulgarians got Roman titles, and Bulgaria became a Catapanate. Serbia and Croatia also submitted to the empire, becoming vassals. Now, our old Vasilevs could celebrate. He toured Bulgaria and went to Athens to give thanks at the Parthenon Church, as the first emperor since Constantine II to visit this important Greek city. Meanwhile, Melos was back in Italy, but he was no match for the insanely talented new Catapano of Italy, Basileios Voyoannis, who completely routed Melos and his northern forces at the Battle of Cannae. Yes, the same site where Romans suffered one of their worst defeats now saw a glorious victory. All of southern Italy was under Roman sway again. In 1019, Basileios returned to Constantinople and had a splendid triumph while the final Bulgarian resistors were put down. Did that mean he could rest at last? Nope. For his final years, he focused on the Caucasus and Italy. King Georgi I, son of Bagrat, was unhappy how Basileios had Georgian lands, so he forcibly occupied a bit of Tau. In 1020, he even tried to ally with the Fatimids against the Romans, and Basileios sure as hell wouldn't let a kid do him dirty like that. The Fatimid Caliph disappeared in 1021, so a war with the Caliphate was prevented, but Georgia wasn't so lucky. Basileios personally went there, ravaged Tau, and defeated Georgi at the Battle of Shrimni, forcing the young king to flee. Worse for Georgi, his ally, the Armenian kingdom of Vaspurakan, was harassed by Seljuk Turks and handed themselves to the Roman Empire for protection. Basileios gladly accepted and made Alexios I Komnenos the Carapano of Vaspurakan. In Italy, Voyevones continued being awesome, captured Salerno, and made the Duke of Capua recognize Roman suzerainty. In 1022, Georgi desperately got two Nicephori to revolt against Basileios, Xiphias, the hero of Cleidion, and Phocas, son of Vardas Phocas. The rebellion soon broke down due to jealousy between the Nicephori and Basileios meddling, with Phocas killed and Xiphias arrested. Then the Romans won a decisive victory over Georgi at the Battle of Sphinx, and Basileios' portion of Georgia was annexed for good, so now he just had to worry about Italy. German Emperor Heinrich II tried in vain to progress past Voyevones' fortifications in Italy before going home crestfallen. In 1023, Basileios returned to Constantinople. He eliminated some political rivals while Voyevones fortified Italy even more. The next year, the daring Carapano invaded Croatia and captured his king's family as a show of Roman strength to the Adriatic states, as Basileios wanted to retake Sicily next and needed the Adriatic to behave. The Sicilian reconquest was supposed to happen in 1025, and both Basilei prepared vigorously, but tragedy came. In December 1025, Basileios died at the age of 67, and the great emperor was buried by his brother Constantinos in a church outside Constantinople. The death of Basileios marked the end of an era. He brought the empire to its greatest extent during the Middle Ages, but with no children of his own, his brother and nieces dominated Roman politics for the first half of the 11th century, leading to the end of the Macedonian dynasty and conflict between the civil and military aristocracy, causing the Roman army to gradually soften and suffer a catastrophic defeat that massacred less than 50 years after Basileios' death. This ill-planned succession was the only main fault of Basileios II's otherwise extraordinary reign. He transformed himself from a spoiled palace prince to one of the most successful Roman commanders through determination and perseverance. He overcame the challenges of prominent usurpers and proved himself as a harsh but just ruler. He was not loved but was respected by all. He devoted his efforts to one objective, the conquest of Bulgaria, and he succeeded, making the Danube the Balkan frontier of the empire once more. He didn't try to make gains in the east, and he only campaigned there 3 times, but each time he did, he made it count. The likes of Basileios will never be seen again, and soon we will dive into how his life's work got ruined by incompetent successors. I will finish this video by reading the epitaph of the Boulgaroktonos. Other kings of old, other burial places for themselves ordained, but I, Basileios, born to the purple, placed my tomb on the site of Heptamon, and I sabotaged from the endless toils which I accepted in battles, and which I endured, for nobody ever saw my spear at rest. From when the King of Heavens called me Autocrator of the Earth and Senior Emperor, but remaining vigilant through the whole span of my life, guarding the children of New Rome, when I marched bravely to the west and as far as the very frontiers of the east, settling countless trophies all over the earth. The Persians and Scythians bear witness to this, and along with them the Abazgin, Ishmael, the Arab, the Iberian. And now, man, looking upon this tomb, reward my campaigns with prayers. Welcome to the 11th century Roman Empire, a superstate stretching from Italy to Armenia. Welcome to Constantinople, the queen of cities. The Romans no longer fear the threat of constant barbarian raids after a heroic generation's efforts. How long will this harmony last? For this episode of Eastern Rome Summarized at least, now let's discover how things fell apart under the Withering Macedonian dynasty. First, let's quickly talk about how people generally characterize this era. Decline and corruption, due to conflict between the civil and military aristocracy of the empire. Like many of these decline narratives, this was only partially true. Indeed, the age of conquest was over, and emperors after Basileios favored the high society of Constantinople more than the dynasty, but conquests were still made in this period, and Rome was indisputably superior to its neighbors. There was also a great cultural flourishing in the empire, especially in the capital, and we get to know some of the most distinguished intellectuals in East Roman history, namely two great sources for 11th century history called Michael, Basileios the polymath on the civil aristocracy side, and Alexios the judge on the military aristocracy side. The 11th century is one of the most lively and well-documented phases of Roman history thanks to all these writers, so I decided to break down the events up to the loss of Anatolia into 2 videos so more could be covered. Now, Constantinos VIII became sole emperor and ruled for 3 mediocre years. Unlike his brother, he had kids, 3 daughters, Evdokia the pious one, Zoe the hot one, and Theodora the smart one. Their father and uncle adored them, but never got to arrange marriages for them, and now they were old. Evdokia became a nun, so the duty of carrying on the Macedonian line fell upon Zoe and Theodora, and Constantinos was the last male Macedonian ruler. So what did he do? First, he cancelled the already prepared expedition to Sicily, abandoning his late brother's final wish. But he did share Basileios' distrust for the dynasty and love for blinding, so he blinded a lot of the new generation of these aristocratic families, like Alexios I Komnenos, Skleros, Phokas, Gorguas, and so on, even though the new gen did nothing wrong. In their place, Constantinos elevated eunuchs and less prominent men, who were quite successful. An Arab fleet was crushed by Samos and Chios Strategii in 1026. In 1027, Constantinos Diogenes, Bulgaria's dukes, repelled raiding Pechenegs, since now Bulgaria, as a part of Rome, no longer buffered it from nomads. Diogenes was also the father of a very important character in our next video. At the same time, George died, and his widow, Mariam, started a brief war with the empire for her son Bagrat IV, but Nicolaus, a eunuch domesticus, raided Georgia until she sued for peace in 1028. The Basileios fell ill later that year, and he needed to find matches for his daughters, pronto, or the dynasty would end. He first chose the dukes of Antioch, Constantinos the Lassinos, but settled on the eparch of the city, Romanos Argyros, to marry Zoe. After coercing Romanos' wife to a nunnery, Constantinos died. He wasn't a terrible ruler, but he pales in comparison to his brother and was the first of a long line of mediocre rulers in this century. As both Romanos and Zoe were very old, they tried all sorts of ways to create a Macedonian heir, but all attempts were futile, so after a while they gave up on their marriage. Romanos was a good eparch, but a mediocre emperor. He and Zoe tonsured Theodora, the only other legitimate Macedonian, to secure his claim. He reversed all of Basileios' policies to limit the dynasty's power and squandered the full treasury Basileios left behind to seem generous like most of his successors would. His knowledge in various fields was superficial at best, but he pretended to be a philosopher like Marcus Aurelius one day and a great conqueror like the Bulgar Slayer on the next. Basileios was not impressed, nor was anybody else. But Romanos had military ambitions, despite being completely incompetent on the field, and he wanted to conquer Aleppo, a harmless emirate with an overwhelming non-Roman population, now led by Myrdacids. The Dukes of Antioch attacked Aleppo but was repulsed in 1029. In 1030, Romanos went there personally and showed his complete lack of common sense. He rejected Aleppo's peace offer, camped his army in Azaz, a bad location, and the Aleppans surprise attacked the camp, routing the Romans. The defeat wasn't devastating, but it was humiliating. Romanos fled Syria in shame, but left some competent officers there, 2 eunuchs and the most talented general of the era, Georgios Maniakis, who saved his city from the Arabs with trickery. The eunuchs avenged Romanos' loss by raiding Azaz, and Maniakis took Edessa in 1031. The emir of Aleppo submitted to the empire, and after the eunuchs' campaign in Phoenicia, other emirs did so as well in 1032, while Maniakis pacified Edessa and sent a precious relic, a letter written by Jesus Christ, to Constantinople. Those were some great gains in the east, thanks to 3 generals who cleaned up Romanos' mess and turned his failure to victory. The emperor learned his limits and focused on things he was better at. He initiated building projects and negotiated better rights for Christians living in the Fatimid Caliphate. In 1033, he even sent a naval raid on Alexandria to demonstrate Roman force to the Fatimids, while the empire made more gains in the Caucasus. However, he would soon meet his end. A Paphlagonian eunuch called Ioannis Orphanotrophos gained much influence at court and plotted for more power by bringing his handsome brother Michael into the palace, who Zoe fell in love with. They started having an affair despite their age difference, and soon, in 1034, Romanos Argyros was murdered in his bath, very possibly at the instigation of Zoe and the Paphlagonians so that Michael can marry her. Michael IV the Paphlagonian worked hard for the empire, despite his worsening epilepsy. He was hastily married to Zoe after Ioannis bribed the Patriarch to do so, but lost interest in his old lover once he was emperor to the disappointment of Zoe. Alexios was mad that this upstart became emperor, so he was placed under house arrest. Then discontent in Antioch was also put down. In 1035, Michael named his successor, his nephew Michael, because Ioannis wanted the Paphlagonian dynasty and put members of his family in as many high posts as possible. The Michaels get confusing, I know. The Vasilevs looked for a military glory of his own. Michael revived the Sicilian expedition, even though Italy lost its greatest Catapanovo Ioannis. In 1036, Maniakis set out to reconquer the island with the Varangian Guard, which included the legendary future king of Norway, Harald Hardrada, while Edessa, deprived of his protection, was assailed by Arabs and was saved by the Dukes of Antioch in 1037. Maniakis and Admiral Stephanos, brother-in-law of the emperor, arrived in 1038, and at Rometa he crushed the Arabs. Then for the next 2 years, he gained control of Messina, Palermo, and Syracuse. In 1040, when the Arabs finally got a big army, Maniakis annihilated them at Troina. However, many Arabs escaped, and he blamed Stephanos, who was harshly punished publicly. Then he alienated his Norman mercenaries, who soon got ideas for Italy of their own. When Michael heard this, he arrested Maniakis, so Stephanos was left in charge and all of Maniakis' gains were reversed soon. Sicily was lost forever, but Messina stayed Roman for 2 more years under Catacalon Komnenos. In the Balkans, a Bulgarian officer called Peter Delian claimed he was Tsar Samuel's grandson and stirred the Bulgarians against the empire. Michael led his army in person to quell the rebellion, even though his epilepsy was almost killing him. Delian defeated Michael at Thessaloniki, then captured a lot of Roman cities, but soon Delian blundered. He sent his cousin, Alucian, to fight the Romans, but he got crushed at Thessaloniki. Alucian and Delian now suspected each other, and Alucian blinded his cousin. In 1041, Michael fought again in person, this time with Hardrada, and won a crushing victory over Delian at the Battle of Ostrovo, then retook the cities the Bulgarians took. Hardrada got the nickname Bulgar Burner for his impressive feats. Later that year, Michael returned to Constantinople for his triumph and executed Delian, but his victory in Bulgaria took a massive toll on his health and he soon died. The young Paphlagonian managed his empire well enough for the short time he had, and now Michael V, nicknamed Caliphate for the profession of his father Stephanos, took the purple. Michael V freed prisoners like Delasinos and Maniakis, who he made Catapano of Italy, but turned on his uncle and benefactor, the Orphanotrophos, by exiling him and the other Paphlagonians. He castrated many male members of his family to make sure he was his own man, and he wasn't done just yet, as his next target was his adoptive mother, Zoe. In 1042, he arrested and exiled her, but that spelled his doom. The people of Constantinople loved the Macedonians, as you might recall, and how could they allow this young upstart to do dirty to the last legitimate faces of this dynasty? The crowd turned on Michael and rioted, and then fetched both Zoe and Theodora from their monastic exile to be crowned as joint empresses, despite Theodora's unwillingness. The people and Varangians declared for their Macedonian sovereigns, while Michael fled to a monastery, but the crowd dragged him out and Hardrada personally blinded him. The people thought now all was good, but they hadn't realized that Zoe and Theodora hated each other, and the sisters decided that a male emperor was needed. Zoe was over 60, but she still hunted for a new husband. She first chose Delasinos, but he wasn't to her taste, so Zoe looked to the gentle and amiable Constantinos Monomachos, who was then proclaimed emperor. Monomachos' reign was pivotal in the history of the empire, as many of the enemies and problems that plagued it through its later history first appeared then, like the Normans who came to southern Italy. Some were there since the Second Battle of Cannae, but now more slowly infiltrated Italy and took advantage of chaos to steal it for themselves. The Catapani of Italy had all proven ineffective against the Normans recently, including Voyovani's son, X Augustus, but in 1042, Catapano Maniakis arrived to salvage the situation, and was successful at first. However, Monomachos ignored and tried to replace Maniakis, while the brother of his mistress, Marius Clarina, got jealous and also disgraced the Catapano, who had a huge temper. Maniakis had enough of being caught up in court intrigue, so in 1043 he revolted against Monomachos after being proclaimed emperor by his troops. The rebels arrived in the Balkans and was victorious all the way until a random loyalist Arab killed Maniakis. So by pure luck, the Vasilevs survived a serious threat to his rule, and the usurper's head was displayed in the Hippodrome. While the civil war was raging, the Serbs of Duklia broke from Roman control, Monomachos put down minor revolts, and his fleet incinerated a hostile Rus fleet with great fire. Then Komnenos struck down the fleeing Rus. One more challenge remained to Monomachos' rule: the people.
As I mentioned, he had a mistress, and in 1044, the masses felt as if this Clarina had too much influence and might harm Zoe and Theodora to gain more power, so they rioted and almost hurt the emperor until the sisters reassured the people that everything was fine. We might get an impression that Monomachos was a weak ruler from these events, but that's not quite true. Though as a staunch supporter of the civil administration who appointed many officials to run civil matters in the provinces at the expense of the thematic system, making the strategy of the themata gradually lose their civil authority to these bureaucrats, he by no means neglected the military. In 1045, the Romans annexed the Armenian kingdom of Ani, but unfortunately exposed them to new enemies, the Seljuk Turks, who were migrating west since Basileios' time. In 1046, they arrived in the Roman Caucasus spreading trouble, so Monomachos sent the Georgian general Liparit against them. But the Turks won the battle and captured the Dukes of Vaspurakin. Back in the capital, Monomachos founded new schools in the University of Constantinople and created the title Consul of Philosophers for a polymath historian Psellos, who had distinguished himself in court. Life in Constantinople was great, but not in the border regions, as hordes of Pechenegs showed up to the Danube seeking refuge in the empire. Kinda like the Goths in the 4th century, no? Monomachos settled them in the Balkans. In 1047, rival Pechenegs crossed the frozen Danube into Roman territory, but the settled Pechenegs took care of those rivals for the emperor, and all the Pechenegs became settlers in the empire. Yet that year, Monomachos had to deal with another revolt, from his relative, Leon Tornikios, an officer of Adrianople. The Thracian soldiers had been bothered by the Pecheneg ordeal somehow and hailed Tornikios as emperor. They besieged Constantinople, but the citizens rushed to the defense of their emperor, who appeared courageously on the walls, and soon Tornikios' army lost their nerve and retreated. The army of the east came over, caught Tornikios in Thrace, and dragged him before the emperor to be blinded. In 1048, the Romans fought the Turks again, and this time they had better luck. Komnenos, now the Dukes of Ani, ambushed the hell out of the Turks at Kapitru with his Georgian allies at night, and they pursued the nomads until dawn. But Liparit stupidly got captured by the Turks, and Monomachos had to pay a lot to get him back. Now having fully realized the threat of the Turks, the emperor decided to send some of his Pechenegs to defend the east in 1049, but they decided to turn back and treacherously revolted. The Balkans were terrorized. Monomachos even had to pull men from the east to deal with the Pecheneg threat. The Romans lost a lot to the Pechenegs at first, suffering a heavy defeat in 1050, but then they changed strategy to guerrilla tactics and their luck began to turn. Back in the capital, Zoe died, and now the Macedonian dynasty was truly in its last days. The emperor sent his barbarian mercenaries to harass the Pechenegs with guerrilla warfare for 3 years, until he could muster another large army in 1053, which sadly also got annihilated. But surprisingly, the Pechenegs themselves had enough of fighting and sued for peace, so the conflict was resolved. Monomachos needed money badly, for he had to deal with more threats than his predecessors, so he accelerated the debasement of the currency that had started under them. Fans of Roman history will remember that the Romans suffered a huge economic crisis back in the 3rd century because emperors had been debasing the value of coins, and the economy was only saved by Constantine the Great, who issued a stable gold currency, the solidus, which had maintained its 24K gold content until now and provided Rome a good economy even in its darkest days. But now, as the solidus declined, so did the Roman economy. Worse, the Normans menaced Italy even more, and in 1053, even the papacy had enough of those terrorists, allying with the Romans against them. Pope Leo IX worked with the Catapano of Italy and led an army against the Normans at Civitate, but he was defeated and the plan to save Italy failed. Now a Norman hostage, Leo acknowledged their presence in Italy in 1054, and that's not even the worst thing to happen that year, but at least there's some good news. The Romans successfully defended Massacred City against the Turks, though they wouldn't be so lucky 27 years later. Now back to the bad news. The Patriarch of Constantinople was Michael Keroularios, who had a strong personality and criticized the practices of the Latin Church with Leon, his Archbishop of Ard. Pope Leo, who had an equally strong personality and believed in papal supremacy, criticized the Romans back. This hostile exchange went on until some papal legates stepped into the Hagia Sophia and excommunicated Keroularios, who in turn excommunicated the legates himself. We now call this excommunication the Great Schism because the rift between the churches of Rome and Constantinople never healed and divided Christendom into 2 parts, Catholic and Orthodox. For the sake of Italy, Monomachos wanted a good relationship with the papacy, but his efforts to stop the schism were in vain, and in 1055, he died. Theodora, the last surviving member of the Macedonian line, was dying too. The empire's apogee was truly at an end. The people, ever loyal to their favorite dynasty, quickly reacclaimed Theodora as sole empress, and like Irene of Athens, she ruled alone, though not for long. Unlike her predecessors, She didn't hand out lavish gifts due to the ever-tightening financial situation. She ruled decently, but still had opposition. Keroularios complained about Theodora openly, and the officer Nikephoros Vrigenius tried to usurp, but he quickly got arrested. Meanwhile, the Seljuks took Baghdad, becoming a major power in the Near East, and the Fatimids captured Laodicea, but the Romans retook it in 1056. However, this brief period of relative peace was soon end, as old Theodora named a random successor called Michael before dying in August, thus ending the glorious Macedonian dynasty that ruled Rome for 2 centuries. Michael VI Stratioticus was now emperor, but he was too weak to rule for long. He freed but alienated Vrigenius, so the ambitious officer plotted against him. There were also many important military men discontent with the regime and ready to establish a new legitimate dynasty. Komnenos, Constantinos Doukas, and Alexios I Komnenos, to just name a few. They decided it was time for a more militaristic rule under a military emperor like Basileios, and they chose Alexios as their leader. The dynasty rebelled in 1057, and after a brief civil war, Michael decided to negotiate with them. Basileios led this negotiation, but it failed. While in the city, Keroularios stirred the people to cheer for Alexios and advised Michael to abdicate, which the emperor agreed to. Michael became a monk, and Alexios became the emperor. So that was the start of the troubles that the Romans had to face in their last few centuries of struggling for the right to exist. I myself always wondered how such a strong legacy left with the Bulgar Slayer turned to massacred in less than 50 years. So I dug deeper into this eventful period, trying to see whose fault it was. To my surprise, everyone shared some blame, but the main culprit wasn't a Roman or a barbarian, it was just the tide of history, much like for the Arab conquests. The emperors of the 11th century were indeed softer and more spoiled, but were well-meaning. Zoe's husbands all had their fails: Romanos III in Syria, Michael IV in Sicily, and Constantinos IX in Italy. But none of these were disastrous, and they all managed to succeed in other domains. Yet, events elsewhere in the world brought 3 dangerous new enemies to the borders of Rome at roughly the same time, and Rome was naturally unable to respond perfectly, especially now that the Macedonian dynasty ended and political instability became a problem again. So that's it for this episode. Join me for the heartbreaking narrative about the loss of Anatolia next time. Thank you for watching. Do you sometimes lie awake at night, wondering what could have been if the Bulgar Slayer chose a more competent successor than his brother? What if he adopted a promising heir like the 5 good emperors did? And if he did, who would it be? Perhaps Alexios I Komnenos, whose upbringing was taken care of by Basileios after he was orphaned. Even though that didn't happen, Alexios now found himself emperor, with a heap of problems and very little resources. And sadly, a Komnenian dynasty would only be found after the empire came to the Ducates, whose neglect drove it to near ruin. Welcome to the Season 2 finale of Eastern Rome Summarized, and we will deal with the events surrounding Massacre today. In 1057, Alexios was welcomed into the capital as emperor by Patriarch Keroularios and the populace, but his popularity wouldn't last for long. I'd like to say he suffered the Nikephoros Phocas syndrome, as in his plans to strengthen the military alienated him from the civilians. He raised the taxes, refused to hand out lavish gifts or grants, and he became unpopular with the people and the church. In the east, the Turks had been helping Ivane, the son of Liparit, raid Anatolia. They sacked many cities, including Melitene, but the locals wouldn't stand for that and took it upon themselves to fight the invaders. They resorted to guerrilla tactics to beat back the Turks. In 1058, the Romans ambushed the hell out of them at Mormrans and Taron, forcing the Turks to flee, so Alexios upgraded Melitene into a ducaton to reward the brave locals. Meanwhile in the capital, Keroularios felt like a kingmaker and strutted around ordering Alexios about, so the emperor exiled him, making Basileios' friend Constantinos Vikoutis the patriarch. The next year, Alexios personally led a campaign against the Pechenegs, who had allied with the Hungarians and were raiding the Balkans again. Most barbarians submitted to imperial authority once they saw the Roman army come, but a Pecheneg called Silti resisted, so Alexios swiftly defeated him. The campaign was a success, but sadly a massive storm hit the returning army, and many men were lost, with Alexios himself barely coming home alive. Shortly afterwards, the emperor fell ill, and, sensing his unpopularity, he willingly abdicated to Constantinos Doukas. Had he reigned longer, he could have saved the empire. Komnenos retired as a monk, hoping that Doukas, who was also a general, would carry on his plans for the military. But whatever military virtues Alexios saw in Constantinos, we will never know, as the new Basileios was the exact opposite of his predecessor. He claimed descent from the valiant Constantinos Dukes of the 10th century, but all we see in his reign were military failures. That's not to say Ducas was a bad man, he just wasn't the man the empire needed at the moment, and his dynasty ruined everything. Constantinos was the friend of Psellos and Lycoudes, and husband of Evdokia Makrimvolitissa, niece of Keralarios, so even at the start he seemed to not be the military emperor the empire sorely needed. In fact, he was staunchly anti-military, neglected frontier defense, and under-equipped the troops. In 1060, Constantinos was almost assassinated by officials in the capital, and his brother, the Caesar Ioannis, had to restore order in the city, but he was too soft to harshly punish the conspirators. While in Italy, Apulia and Calabria were basically lost to the Normans, led by Robert Guiscard. All that was left of Roman Italy were a collection of cities that the Normans preyed on and captured over the next few years. In the east, the Turks became more threatening. In 1062, they raided around Martyropolis, killed the Dukes of Edessa, but got massacred by the Norman mercenary Hervé Frankopoulos. However, in 1063, Frankopoulos took bribes from the Turks since he was a fickle Norman, and Constantinos had him executed. The next year, the Seljuks got a new sultan, Alp-Arslan, who was ambitious and energetic. Under him, the Turks savagely pressed onto Roman territory, and they looked to Ani, the pride of Armenia. Ani was an impressive city, well defended, but internal dissension and a greedy governor in charge during the siege caused the city to be taken by the Turks, who slaughtered everyone and wrestled Ani from the emperor. It didn't help that Constantinos, who tried to seem pious, was being intolerant to the non-Chalcedonian Armenians of the empire, and he gave zero response to the sack of Ani. Even though the terrified Armenian kingdom of Vanad ceded its territory to Rome for protection in 1065, the end of Roman Armenia was near. In the Balkans, another Turkic threat demanded the empire's attention. A people called the Oghuz Turks crossed the Danube and devastated the region, raiding as far as Greece. Again, Constantinos did nothing, but the people pressured him to do something, so he took a tiny army to field to act like he cared about this just for show. Luckily for him, the Oghuz Turks suffered from a plague and attacks from the locals, so most retreated and the rest were settled in the Balkans. Constantinos returned home to celebrate his victory. In 1066, more trouble brewed up in the Balkans, as his gifts to monasteries demanded more tax revenue, and northern Greece revolted until the emperor lowered the taxes again. While the Normans famously conquered England, so many Anglo-Saxon refugees came into the empire, joining the Varangian Guard. In Italy, the Normans took everything from the Romans and planned to attack the Balkans next, but the Roman naval commander, Michael Mavricas, defeated them, then took some Varangians to Italy and briefly reconquered Bari and other cities. But it was clear that Italy would be lost soon. In 1067, the emperor was dying, but before he died, he forced his wife Evdokia to swear before the Senate that she would not remarry, on the pain of death, so his sons Michael and Constantius could rule. After such a solemn oath was sworn, he died, having gravely weakened the empire and left it in a terrible shape. Evdokia, however, seeing the situation of the empire, broke her oath so a capable man could take care of the barbarians assailing it. That year the Turks dealt much damage to Anatolia, as a raiding horde sacked Caesarea, plundered Cilicia and Antioch. Just raiding and holding the Caucasus wasn't enough for them, now they set eyes on Anatolia, the heartland of the empire. Who did Evdokia choose to face the threat? At the time in imperial captivity, there was the Dukes of Sedica, Romanus, son of Constantinos Diogenes, who was accused of plotting against the throne and now awaited sentence. Evdokia decided to marry this handsome general, and the Senate agreed, but Caesar Ioannis strongly opposed the idea, defending the interests of the Ducid dynasty, and the Varangians did as well, but the empress married Emperor Romanus IV Diogenes on New Year 1068 anyway. Michael VII was utterly uninterested in state affairs, so he just let it happen. Diogenes wasted no time trying to repair the empire's eastern defenses, and he set out for campaign immediately. He gathered the ill-equipped armies, a lot of foreign mercenaries, and he went for Syria. But on the way he heard some Turkish raiders came to Pontus, so he pursued them and recovered their plunder, then rejoined his army in Syria. The Turks were establishing themselves there as well, so Diogenes captured Hierapolis and defeated an army of Arabs and Turks. Then he checked the fort of Arta before going home, having secured the southeastern frontier. In 1069, the Basileios campaigned again, but his mercenary Crispin rebelled, so Diogenes arrested the treacherous Norman. Yet Crispin's men still ravaged Anatolia for a time, along with the Turks who again raided Caesarea. Diogenes spent his precious campaign time on driving them out, then marched for Aklat. But meanwhile, Iconium got sacked by the Turks, so he had to chase down that raiding party, who escaped by abandoning their loot. In 1070, Diogenes stayed in Constantinople, where he had become unpopular like Alexios I Komnenos since he was too focused on the military. He sent Komnenos' nephew, Manuel, to campaign for him that year, but Manuel got captured by a Turk, Chrysocoulos, who surprisingly rebelled against the Sultan and returned the young general to the emperor and gave the Romans intel on Seljuk tactics. Diogenes sent a relief force to Bari, the last Roman city in Italy, but the Normans intercepted it and Bari fell in 1071. That was the end of Roman Italy. But that wasn't the worst thing that happened that year. I'm sure you've all heard of the Battle of Manzikert. Alp Arslan besieged Manzikert and Diogenes tried to negotiate with him but marched there anyway. This large army of 40,000 contained many foreign mercenaries and Andronicus Ducas, the son of Caesar Ioannis, who hated Diogenes. Alp Arslan was in Syria at the time, but once he heard that the emperor was going for Manzikert, he rushed to Armenia. Though Diogenes easily retook the city and sent Nikephoros Virgenios against the forces of the Sultan. However, the Turks were hard to beat, and they sent an envoy to negotiate. But Diogenes knew this was his best shot to win a decisive victory and secure the east for good, so he ignored the envoy and marched to battle on August 26th. Diogenes took Alp Arslan's camp, but the Turks refused to fight a pitched battle, so the emperor ordered the army to retreat. However, Andronicus, commander of the rear, spread the rumor that Diogenes fell, and the Roman army retreated in panic. Taking advantage of the chaos, the Turks quickly routed the Roman right wing, then the left wing led by Virginius, and finally the center, where Diogenes and his Varangians fought on fiercely, but they were surrounded. Andronicus and many mercenaries fled to safety, while Diogenes was wounded and became the first emperor to be captured by Muslims in battle. The Turks were thrilled while the Romans were horrified, and the Ducai decided to depose Diogenes, placing Michael VII back on the throne. But Diogenes wasn't dead. After spending time in the Sultan's captivity and concluding a peace, the loser of Manzikert was allowed to go home, to find himself no longer emperor. Before long, Ioannis and Psellos, Michael's tutor, gained more power from Michael by exiling his mother Evdokia, and they fought a civil war with Diogenes. Andronicus and Crispin the Norman defeated Diogenes' men in 1072, so the ex-emperor had to surrender. The Ducai promised not to harm him, but Diogenes was cruelly blinded, possibly ordered by Ioannis, and the unfortunate warrior emperor died in misery from his infected eye wound. The Ducid regime didn't become secure after this, as Michael was a weak ruler and any opportunistic aristocrat could seize the throne if they so wished. Diogenes tried hard to save the empire, he really did, but his efforts sadly caused the tragic civil conflict that followed his deposition and the loss of Anatolia in the 1070s. I really feel bad for him. Emperor Michael was a bookish young man, unfit to rule and strongly influenced by Ioannis and Psellos. He was ruling an extremely vulnerable empire, and he had zero skill, so the disaster that followed should not be blamed solely on him. The Seljuks won a great victory and now owned Roman Armenia, but Alp Arslan was assassinated in 1072, and his teenage son succeeded him. With two inexperienced young rulers, the Romans and Turks should be on equal footing, right? Well, not exactly. The Seljuks were Turks who accepted the settled life like their Muslim subjects, but they also had many Turkish subjects who still lived like the nomads they used to be. We call these Turks the Turkmen tribes, and they looked for land to sustain their nomadic way of life all the time. Anatolia was the perfect target. Sultan Malik Shah urged the Turkmen to raid Anatolia so they wouldn't cause trouble for him, and the nomads did just that. They broke through the mountainous defenses of Anatolia, flooding into the heartland of the empire, which they took over bit by bit. Now let's look back to Michael, who also had to deal with the loss of Sirmium to the Hungarians and the Bulgarian revolt in the Balkans. Ioannis got a new Logothetis, Nikephoritsis, to manage imperial finances, but this greedy eunuch's fiscal measures caused the Bulgarian Georgi Voiti to revolt with the Serbs. Luckily, Vrienius, now the Dukes of Bulgaria, crushed the rebellion in 1073. But that year, the Normans ruined everything for the Romans yet again, as Hussem de Bayeux, a mercenary at Manzikert, decided to betray his Roman employers and carve up a little kingdom of his own in Anatolia. Never trust these Norman scumbags, for they have no honor. Hussem fought with Manuel Komnenos' brothers Isaurians and Alexios against the Turks, but the one shot the Romans had of retaking Anatolia was ruined by the Normans taking over of Galatia and Lycaonia, which caused Isaurians to be captured and ransomed by the Turks. To solve the Norman threat, Nikephoritsis sent the Caesar and Nikephoros Votaniatis against the renegades, but the imperial army was defeated and Ioannis was captured. Then Hussem marched on Constantinople and burned Chrysopolis, hoping that people will topple the regime. That didn't happen. But Michael recognized the Turkish conquests in Anatolia that year, which allowed Malik Shah to send the Romans some Turkish troops. Husayn forced Ioannis to be his puppet emperor, but both were captured and ransomed by the Turks. Ioannis was bought back by Michael, but Husayn's wife got to him before the Romans could, and the Normans' reign of terror continued. Husayn defeated a Roman-Georgian coalition in 1075, but the next year, a talented young Alexios Komnenos finally caught him with help from the Turks. The Norman threat was suppressed, but the Turkish threat was not. Many Romans just abandoned their posts and left Anatolia to the invaders, but Nikephoretes trained locals to be heavy cavalry and revived the Athanatitagma, one of the many units lost previously. Despite his efforts, the military situation in Anatolia wasn't improving much, while his meddling with grain prices literally caused a famine in 1076 in Constantinople, where refugees all over the empire fled, from Asia and Europe, where the Catapana of Dorostona Nestor revolted and got the Pechenegs to plunder their way to the capital due to dissatisfaction with Nikephoretes. Nestor didn't take the capital, but he went back to Thrace with his Pechenegs still raiding the empire. Along with military and political crises, the devaluation of the Solides dropped to an all-time low, and the Roman economic situation was so bad that Michael earned the nickname Parapinakis. Michael Duca's complete failure to reign and the collapse of his empire sparked two revolts in 1077, that of Nikephoros Votaniatis and Vrienos, simultaneously in Asia and Europe. Vrienos was hailed as emperor and marched on the capital, but Michael sent Husayn and Alexios against the European usurper, while Votaniatis mustered what native Romans of Anatolia he could and Turks by allying with Suleiman ibn Kutlimish, the Turk who took Nicaea in 1078. For his help, Suleiman and his Turks were allowed to settle next to Constantinople itself. While in the city, Michael abdicated due to public pressure and Votaniatis became emperor. People might have saw the old general as a hero, but Votaniatis basically created the Seljuk Sultanate of Rome that his successor spent so much time trying to reconquer, by enlisting the help of the Turks. The judge Michael Ataliates certainly saw potential in the new military emperor and dedicated his history about recent fortunes of the empire to Votaniates, hoping that the old Vasilevs will find it useful and save the empire, and our other historian Psellos died soon after the fall of his pupil. Nikephoretes tried to flee to Husayn, but the Norman predictably betrayed him to the new regime. The eunuch was tortured to death. Votaniates married into the Duca's clan to secure legitimacy, even though his bride, the wife of Michael, Maria of Alania, was 50 years younger than him, and now Votaniates needed to deal with usurpers and Turks. Vrienos was still undealt with, but now Votaniates sent Alexios many mercenaries, and after a bloody battle at Calabria, the rebel was defeated and blinded. Then Votaniates had to face the rebellions of Nikephoros Vasilakis and Konstantios Doukas in 1079, which were put down, then that of Nikephoros Milesinos, who seized the remnants of Roman Anatolia in 1080 with Turkish aid. This revolt Alexios refused to quell, since Milesinos was his brother-in-law, and soon young Komnenos would revolt too. Votaniates named the non-Dukas heir, which alienated all the Dukai, including Alexios' wife Irene Dukaina. So with the help of the Dukai, Alexios seized the capital in 1081, becoming the emperor of a dying empire. What Alexios did was revive this empire with his Herculean efforts, becoming legendary. The Roman swift fall from fortune was lamentable, and there were many reasons for it. But the main one was the incompetence of the Dukids, who abandoned everything Alexios Komnenos worked for and neglected the army so much almost all of Anatolia was lost. But now, another Komnenos wore the purple, and Alexios would set things right. The Komnenian Restoration would be our first topic when Eastern Rome Summarized returns for Season 3. I can't wait to get to that, because I can't bear leaving the narrative as such a bad moment for the Romans for too long. So, thank you all for watching, and I will see you very soon with new videos.
In that, with the rise to power of ambitious young Alexios Komnenos in a way quite reminiscent of Leon the Syrian's ascendancy, we end an era. If you are interested in dynastic parallels between the Isaurians and the later Komneni, I will direct you to one of my old videos, in which I analyze their historical trajectories and point out the uncanny similarities and fundamental differences that make for both dynasties as the founders of a new period of history for Rome. But now that we are concluding, I'll get into the details as I promised. I consider both the Isaurian and Komnenian dynasty to be the groundwork for the Middle and Late Byzantine sagas. So, I use the founding date of both as the start of their respective ones. I also consider the Dukas and post-massacre period to be the complete chaos that saw the dissolution of the order that previously stood, as the wrapping up of Middle Byzantium. So it is included as the ending. Like for late antiquity, I see the Heraclean Age and 20 Years' Anarchy as the conclusion to late antiquity, rather than the incipit of the Middle Ages. It takes first chaos and utter anarchy, an existential crisis in the real sense of the word, for a new order to emerge. It could be radically different from the past, and that is why we use some sort of periodization, even though it's arbitrary and not really my favorite thing in the world. But it has a certain utility and helps us better understand the great transitional moments of Byzantine history. History is constantly shifting. One event cannot usher in a new era. It takes many factors and many years, but once a great confluence of factors converge at last, it's necessary to realize that a large change has taken place. And this also roughly corresponds to how the neighbors of medieval Rome evolved. While Middle Byzantium refound its identity, European Latin Christendom was shaping under the Carolingians and Holy German emperors, while the Caliphates evolved into a truly Islamic civilization, and not just another world empire of late antiquity under Arab rule. It would be overtaken by the Turks by the time of late Byzantium, as the Latins of the West would also stretch its wings and attempt their first adventures outside of Europe, into the exotic land of the Greeks. It is the constant advances of Latins and Turks that define the geopolitical and cultural trajectory of late Byzantium, which would fall twice, first to the Latins, then to the Turks, and for good. And that's how I have defined the Middle Byzantium. Do you agree? Disagree? Let me know your opinions. And thanks for watching, especially to those who have followed each of these videos since the start. Massive thanks also to my generous patrons: Dragon Lord, Romfea Game Projects, Cody Danroth, Tiropita Productions, Francis Morin, and Kiasik.